What depressing meal made you want to give up on everything? Christmas Eve, I was working late. Broke and tired, I had a gas station cheeseburger and chips that was on sale because those items were about to expire. When I called to say hello to my mother, she mentioned how she gave some prime rib to her dog. I bought a discounted cake at the grocery store that had Happy Anniversary Anna still visible in the indentation, even though most of the frosting had been scraped off. I got drunk and ate it alone. I kept a tough schedule as a college student, and I remember one night I was working my part-time job in the library. The shift was from 5 through 9 p.m., and I had classes all morning and my internship all afternoon. At some point during my shift, I realized I hadn't actually eaten all day and managed to scrounge an old, flattened granola bar from my bag. I couldn't take a break and I wasn't allowed to eat at the desk, so I hid under a bin of DVDs and scarfed down that disgusting, dry oat patty like a feral raccoon, enjoying a snack under a dumpster. Not my finest moment or meal. The last thing my mother ever cooked me. I ate it almost a week after she died. I didn't want to waste it, but I knew that once I ate it, she'd really be gone. The pain never goes away, it just gets smaller and smaller until you can shove it away and it doesn't sit on you anymore. It's my birthday today, and I am eating a corn dog that I just cooked in the microwave. Alone, naturally. A tortilla topped with ketchup and mustard. Don't judge me. Dry oatmeal, the Quaker brand that comes in the little brown packets. I couldn't be bothered to heat it up or even add water, so I just ate it straight out the packet. On my 21st birthday, I'm now 62, I had a coupon for a free sundae at Farrell's. I went there by myself to enjoy my ice cream, but they bought it out in full regalia with Happy Birthday playing and singing together, and now everyone was looking at me sitting all by myself with my scoop of plain vanilla. I mean, I guess it was free. I still think I would have been mortified enough to lose my appetite at that point. The social judgment from around me probably would have stopped me from being able to enjoy that meal. But yeah, like you said, free calories. At 24 years old, went to stay with my fiancée and her family for Christmas. She dumped me on Christmas morning because reasons. I lived about 90 minutes away in another town. I went home. No dog because it was in the kennels for the holidays because I was meant to be away. Flatmates were away. Family are all out of town on holiday. Christmas dinner was leftovers from the back of the fridge, alone. Not even any booze to numb the pain. Worst meal of my life. I didn't have it, but my dad had a Whopper on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial on Thanksgiving Day because he couldn't attend the nice Thanksgiving dinner because he forgot his blazer. I once talked to this girl online dating for quite a while. She told me to meet her at a pub, but then she texted she was running late so she had me order for her, so I did. But then never showed after I waited with food on the table for about 30 minutes. So I ate her Caesar wrap the next day for lunch, at home, by myself, and never heard from her again. So I'll just assume she was hit by a bus, even though my town doesn't have buses. 2015 was a pretty rough year for me. I left a job I enjoy for a risky new position at a startup. It was a good company, but the project I was working on was mismanaged from the start. No guidance, no proper planning, no heads up about lack of said planning, and it all fell on me. Days turned into weeks without a day off, 14-hour days, and every time I asked for more resources or help, I was denied. Eventually, it got to a point where I couldn't run what I was put in charge of, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I ended up quitting and survived on a bit of savings. Once that started to run out, I tried to take a much lower level job, which was terrible. I suffer from anxiety and have bouts of gloominess. Read depression. And it had gone untreated, so it crescendoed to when I just quit that job as well. I moved out of my apartment and had to move back in with my mother for a while, on New Year's Day 2016. My brain knew somewhere that I would make it out of this, but the question was when. Apologizing for the hyperbole up front, I felt like a victim with a bullet wound in an ambulance. I knew I was safe, I was where I needed to be and heading to the right place, but holy crap, there was a chance I might not make it in time. During those turbulent few months, the woman I loved, and I mean disgusting, pathetic, putrid pink loved, ended things with me after a year of quasi-are-we-actually-a-couple dating. I was in pieces. No job, no love, no real friends who weren't busy with their own lives aside from the occasional, "How are you?" text. My sleep schedule was off. I was up all night and asleep all day. I watched terrible TV shows on a couch while I watched the days of my life crash by a second at a time. I started feeling insane, hurt, not having work. I called every job I saw a listing for, dozens of them if not more. Eventually, I found an old email for someone I worked with once at that first job that I enjoyed. He was in California and offered to help me get a position out there, which did work out. I loved my home, my city, and even this lady still. I knew that staying there wasn't intelligent if it was for someone else who didn't love me back. She even encouraged me to go. She told me I'd be better off not being around her for a while. I accepted the job and bought a plane ticket. My mum dropped me off at the airport crying. She just wanted me to be happy. I'm not usually happy. I felt like I was saying goodbye to a whole chunk of my adult life that I just wanted to get back so desperately. I went through security, checked in, and found the gate. I hadn't eaten in a day or so, so I decided to sit down and have some Burger King before I boarded in an hour or so. I bought a spicy chicken sandwich with fries and a soda. I pulled up my carry-on to the table, sat down, and opened up the food. All I was thinking about was her. This was it. I was leaving. I'm not coming back, at least not for a while. If she called me at 2 a.m. in a week and wanted to see me, I just couldn't go see her. As I slowly ate the food that I wasn't even really in the mood for, she texted me, "Have a good trip." For some reason, that set me off. I just stopped eating and started crying. I was making a mistake. I should go home now. I should go to her door and make one last effort. It would be great. Don't get on the plane. Don't get on the plane. I sipped my soda. Don't get on the plane. A few minutes later, I threw my trash out and walked to the gate. When they started boarding, I got on the plane. It took off. I left. I spent 2016 in California. I made new friends. I got to see some amazing things, and I, as cheesy as it sounds, worked on myself. I grew to enjoy California very much over time. However, I still missed my hometown, and eventually last month I realized that I wanted to come home. Not because of fear or because of her, but because I just felt like I wanted more time with my home city. I missed the streets, the architecture, the people, the food. It was when I realized this is why I wanted to come home that I decided to. My company was very understanding and helpful in securing a transfer. I'm back in my home city now, working the job I had before all of this happened. I'm glad I get to see my friends, and yeah, it turns out I do have a lot of friends, but you can never see that when you feel like I did back then. I still think about her sometimes, but I haven't talked to her or seen her since I got back. I feel no need. Things get better. But that was a terrible Burger King value meal. In short, got dumped, left 2 jobs, had no money, moved back with my mum, decided to move to California and leave everything I loved behind, ate some depressing, tear-covered French fries at the airport, and things got better. Bologna sandwich in jail. I love that we had a long story in which the food was really just the watershed moment and we got to see the full exhaustive before and after context, and then it was followed by a 4-word sandwich story where I think a bit of context would have very much sated some of our curiosity about how that meal came to pass. Let's get some balance here, people. My 25th birthday. It was 1977 and the whole country was in the midst of the energy crisis. So that Friday, Carter had ordered offices closed and only heated to 35 degrees. Everyone got a day off. But my new boss had a big trial going on in Washington, D.C. and needed me to go into the office long enough to transcribe tapes he was having flown in that a cab driver would deliver from the airport. It was 2 degrees outside and there was a couple of feet of snow on the ground, and the bus I took to work, an hour-long trip by the way, had no heat. Only one security guard was in the building when I got there, and I typed the brief as fast as I could when it finally arrived, after I'd sat there freezing for 2 hours. All through this, I knew my family was preparing a great dinner for me, so as soon as I was done, things would be nice. Ham, mashed potatoes, cauliflower with cheese sauce, and angel food cake. Left the office, and the bus back home not only didn't have heat, it had some of the windows stuck open. Shivering all the way home, I dreamed of the great dinner I'd soon have. I got to my mother's and it turned out she and my dad had had a massive fight, and then she and my snotty teenage sister had their bags packed and planned on coming home with me. No dinner was cooked or even anticipated. We got carry-out chili and went back to my apartment where my sister fussed about everything, insulted me all evening and proceeded to remove all of my dishes from the cabinets and rewash them because she wasn't sure they were clean enough to suit her. Mother sat and cried. Turned out Dad was running around on her, and this was the first of several weekends where he'd pick a fight and storm off on a Friday and stay gone all weekend. Worst birthday ever. I was fed dog food for a while as a kid. Sitting with the kids, laughing about their day, encouraging them to eat their dinner so they'll have energy tomorrow. And then, after they're in bed, eating the leftovers off their plates and filling up on tap water because I didn't have enough money to feed all of us, and I wanted to protect them from knowing that I'd failed as a parent. The very fact that they ate dinner that night is evidence that you didn't fail. You sacrificed for your children, and that's exactly what a good parent does. Times can be tough, very, very tough, and when times are that tough, what separates the good parents from the failed ones is who the parents put first. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Unlimited pancakes at IHOP. I took a bet that I couldn't finish 20 pancakes for $150. I started regretting that bet on number 7 or 8. New Year's Eve between 2013 and 2014. McDonald's, eaten by me, my uncle, my parents, and a neighbor in a house with a dying man. My grandfather was dying of end-stage liver cirrhosis, Parkinson's, and a blood clot. He was on hospice care in his own home. We couldn't afford a full-time caregiver, so me and my uncle were voluntold to care for him as he died. New Year's rolls around, we share a depressing meal together and try to be of good cheer, but it didn't work. I was an escort, and I'd usually try to get in and out on my way home. I usually felt really dirty sitting in the booth by myself, but the worst time was when I was hired by 2 guys, and after we did the deed, they went and got me Wendy's, which I proceeded to eat undressed at the foot of a dirty motel bed, while those 2 creeps stared at me. Every Valentine's Day, I order and eat a whole pizza while watching Eternal Sunshine. I ate a huge bag of raisins for 3 days because that's all I had. One time in college, I was returning to my dorm room late at night, and I was really hungry, but I didn't have any cash for the vending machine, nor any means of transportation to the nearest food joint. Sure enough, there was a pizza box sitting atop the trash can in the hallway, the box not being big enough for the can. I opened it and I found 2 entire slices of pepperoni pizza, which I ate then and there. It filled me up, but I felt like a damn hobo. I was invited to Thanksgiving dinner at my brother's house. His wife asked me to bring crescent rolls. I was having a hard time financially that year, and my long-term boyfriend had recently been diagnosed with stage 4 throat cancer. At the time, I had about $3 to my name. I couldn't afford crescent rolls, so I bought 2 packs of Kroger Brown and Serve rolls for $1.99. My sister-in-law was quite visibly annoyed and kept mentioning all day long how much she was craving crescent rolls. Driving back from Disney World, eating a fabulous dinner of fresh shrimp, oysters, and fish overlooking the sun setting on Panama City Bay, while the entire family of 6 all silently sobbed at the table because we were just told the family dog of 13 years died. We miss you, Maggie. Or there was that one time mac and cheese made with only water and 1 bag of popcorn. That had to last a week until Mum got food stamps. Both sad for different reasons, and they make me thankful for the life and love that I now have. I ate a $5 pizza at 10:30 at night in the floor of an empty room that had earlier been a bedroom. We were sitting on cot mattresses, and it was the last night we had in the house before we had to be out. It was the day after Christmas. A sad potato smiley. I don't know if the word sad was just the adjective used to describe how this meal made this person feel, or if there are potato smileys that actually do look sad. Because the former is indeed not a great meal, but the idea that kids can be contemplating that their food doesn't want to be eaten is quite horrifying to a certain type of personality. Ran out of food in my apartment and didn't feel like going shopping since it was 1 a.m. Found taco shells which I promptly heated in the oven, then topped them with peanut butter. During basic training in the army, we were doing our first week under full field conditions. To get our food, we had to sneak up to a position and steal our combat rations. The combat rations in the IDF are pretty crappy, but there were some dried fruit pieces and olives and stuff that could be pleasant. The only truly gross thing that no one would eat was the canned meat, and meat is in big questionable quotation marks. We stole our food and got ready to eat when we noticed the box had been tampered with. Our sergeant had gone and pulled everything out except the canned meat. I put the ketchup and mustard on a hot dog bun and ate it with no hot dog once. It's like the last bite, but for the whole thing. I was super depressed and ate an entire box of off-brand mac and cheese raw with nothing but a cool glass of water and a steady flow of tears to wash it down. Good times. The last lasagna made by my stepmom. She was adorable, sweet, and always treated me like one of her own, always making sure I had enough food since I lived 2 cities away. Their house was too small and my dad spent half the time there, and half the time at my house where I was a teen, since it would take him 3 hours to get to work from my place versus hers, 20 minutes. She died on a drive-by shootout on a night I was supposed to go join them for dinner. I gave them a maybe and ended up spending the night at my boyfriend's, ignoring my phone lighting up because we were doing the deed, and when I was done, went for my phone, got the news, and was in shock. Just walked out to the living room, totally undressed, where my then boyfriend's roommate and his date were watching a movie in the middle of the night. Went for the bathroom, took a cold shower to get ready to handle everything, completely oblivious to the fact that I just flashed them both when I walked by. Thanksgiving dinner alone in a Waffle House 2,000 miles from my family. When you're alone on Thanksgiving, Waffle House is your family. Tortilla wrap with Kraft singles. I threw in some uncooked ramen noodles for the crunch factor. It's the poor man's equivalent to the crispy chicken wraps that pretty much every restaurant does now, except it had no chicken, just chicken flavoring from the noodles. I remember how we got our first microwave when I was little. I was so excited because I loved melted cheese on top of a piece of bread. Well, we didn't have any bread that day, and for some reason I didn't even use a plate. But I just put a slice of cheese inside the microwave and used a knife to get the cheese out and ate it. 9 out of 10 would recommend. I was living with my parents after college and had a hankering for Peking duck. I spent the weekend getting the duck, buying the equipment to correctly hang it in preparation, basting the skin with honey, making the little pancakes by hand. It wasn't until I took it out of the oven that I realized I had no one to share it with. I sat by myself in the dimly lit kitchen and could only eat a few bites before I was so disgusted with myself that I threw the rest away. 2 months later, I moved across the country and started a new life. To this day, I still hate Peking duck. My wife doesn't like Famous Dave's and she was gone one weekend, so know what I got? Famous Dave's. I sat waiting, game for my barbecue goodness to take home, talking to the person about how I never get it and all. I got home and dig in and it's pretty bad. So disappointed and let down. In short, the Famous Dave's in Rochester, Maine isn't that good. Christmas in New York City. Too broke and not enough vacation to travel and no friends in the city yet. The holiday consisted of a couple of days' worth of Little Caesars and whiskey. Canned tuna mixed with mayonnaise packets from some fast food place and sriracha on saltine crackers. I actually like it, and I don't eat it because I'm poor, but after I told my mum that's what I was eating during a phone call, all the presents I got for birthdays and Christmas is food-related. Well, I guess I don't mind, and I still have a crap load of Pepperidge Farm sausages and cheeses she sent me for Christmas. When I was a kid, we had a Thanksgiving dinner in the hospital cafeteria where my dad was working late. I was one sad little camper. I had only a little money left for the last week of the month, so I just picked up some cheap veggies to cook with some mince that I already had. The intention was to cook a large meal to last for the whole week. Well, I had a brain toot and forgot to brown the mince before I mixed in a whole lot of liquid, so I ended up just having to boil this watered-down mince until it was cooked enough for me to eat. It was really gross, and it was all I had for that week. My flatmates all made fun of me. I went to a high-end restaurant, $30 for pasta with peas. My fault for thinking there was more to it, I guess. A McDonald's salad. Hot chocolate powder from the packet scooped out with a spoon. I thought this was for depressing stories, not delicious ones. A salad. I had to lose a few pounds, and I didn't know yet that dieting is focused more on eating the right food and in regulation, and that it didn't mean starvation and depriving myself of the good stuff. I sat there chewing my greens, feeling like a miserable cow grazing alone in a pasture. I work at a diner-like thing, and we're able to eat leftover stuff that's either too small to serve or something like leftover fries. I once had a lunch that consisted of half a mozzarella stick and 2 fries. Oh boy, the minimum wage special. I'd say it never gets old, but it really, really does. Alarmingly quickly, actually. A sheet of paper. And no, I'm not kidding. Probably every meal I've been eating since I moved to a different country for work. I don't know anyone here, so most of my meals are eaten alone. Breakfast on the train to work or at my office desk, since I don't have time in the morning to eat it at home. Lunch mostly alone, since I'm not close with anyone at work. Dinner alone at home, since me and my housemates get off from work at different times, and I'm not close with them either. I miss the days when I looked forward to eating a home-cooked meal shared with my family back home. Killed a goat in Afghanistan. Platoon leader was killed. Ate the goat. Lots of people sad. Plain toast and applesauce, which I later threw up. I love the stomach flu. When I ordered some awesome udon noodles like 5 minutes before the "It's not you, it's me" speech began. I went camping and woke up extremely hungover one morning. I was starving but really didn't want to try and cook anything, so I settled for canned chicken breast and crackers. It was terrible. The smell of the chicken juice should have been my first warning. Lawyers. What is the dumbest thing your client has ever done? Mine wore a shirt that said "Natural Born Killer" into a hearing for an assault charge. I had him turn it inside out. He went down anyway, but at least it was for, actually assaulting someone rather than the shirt. Cashed in their retirement while in bankruptcy. When it's in cash, it's not protected. My all-time favorite is a client I had who was charged with DUI, who wanted to challenge the charges on the grounds that he didn't think he was drunk and the tests were administered properly. Guess who appeared at his court hearings rip-roaring drunk twice? And then, both times, he got into his car and tried to drive away. And both times, the police promptly stopped him, administered a breathalyzer, and charged him with DUI and related offenses. We didn't win that case. I was in court contesting a traffic ticket and saw something like this. The guy was in court for a DUI and was 7 sheets to the wind. He was taken out in shackles. Fell over twice. Oof, these just sound like alcoholics. I hope they both got the AA attendance included in the sentencing. Told a client, "Don't say anything to the police, wait until I get there." He confesses to a crime he isn't even being investigated for. This was relayed to me by the RP manager of the office supply chain I worked for in high school. Individual stores didn't have RP managers, they existed at the district level. A young man, let's call him Eric, had been with the company for almost a year. He worked in office supplies and was by this time known to management to have light fingers. At some point, the store manager called in young Eric to his office to discuss his continued employment with the company. When Eric entered the room, there was a strange man who was introduced as the RP manager for the district. The conversation from the RP manager was very short, hoping to elicit a confession to the pens they knew he had stolen. "Eric, we know what's been going on. If you tell us about it, we'll promise not to press charges against you." Eric just about crapped himself and proceeded to spill all the details. The assistant manager was bringing in additional software, packing it in empty boxes of printer paper, and selling the printer paper to his friends, and somehow writing off the software as stolen or returned. Eric's job was just to fetch the boxes from the back when the friends came to pick them up. Not my client, but I was on the prosecutor's side when a defendant failed to appear for court. His attorney can't reach him, nobody knows where he is, so we all sit there for about half an hour until the judge gets sick of it and moves on with the docket. We find out later that day that the defendant decided to rob a 7-Eleven the night before and was sitting in jail 2 counties over when he should have been in court. I used to represent patients who were involuntarily committed because of a mental illness, so I wouldn't describe them as dumb, but still. Clerk: "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" Client: "No." This happened a dozen different times. Had a client show up to child custody hearing high on crystal. When she arrived, she began screaming at the judge and demanding that her "no good crystal head baby daddy" be drug tested. I took her into the hallway and told her that if the judge ordered a test for the dad, he would have to order one for her. End of argument. I worked for the public defender's office and met a client in jail for a lineup that he had adamantly demanded regarding a crime with multiple witnesses. I met the client for the first time in a separate room to let him know how it would go down and what to expect. This is the kind of lineup you traditionally see on television, where there are a number of similar-looking people standing shoulder to shoulder in front of mirrored glass. They pull the people for the lineup from the jail population, and despite their best efforts, this is not a huge population. I walk in to meet the client, and he has a sty on his lower left eyelid the size of a golf ball. It was the most identifiable mark on a human's face I have ever seen. He still demanded the lineup and was identified instantly by every single witness without a shred of doubt in their mind. He still demanded a trial, and the sty was gone by the time the trial commenced. In conclusion, guy with a golf ball-sized lump on his face demands comparative lineup. Judge was determining if a defendant qualified for a public defender. Judge: "Sir, do you have any income?" Defendant: Yes, Your Honor. From what source do you have your income? Selling Mary J., Your Honor. This happened in Illinois, and the defendant was not under oath. Honesty is the best policy, unless it involves telling a judge you sell grass for a living. Agreed. Omission is not technically a lie. Here's another ill-advised admission. When I was sitting for appointments one time, a defendant said hustling as his source of income. Everyone in the courtroom laughed a little, even the judge. I represent clients before the IRS, had a couple who owed around $250,000 in back taxes. We had no defense, so the only thing to do was have the clients meet with the IRS and plead for leniency. Well, the wife got arrogant with the IRS agent and at one point stood up and screamed at the IRS agent, who was a pretty decent person, making a very middle-class wage, "You'll take away my Mercedes over my dead body." Then she stormed out of the conference room. Needless to say, she lost the Mercedes. Not a lawyer, but this happened in court. My dad was suing a customer for non-payment. The judge ruled in his favor for the whole $15,000. The guy he was suing got up to leave, but walked over to my dad and said, "If you think you're going to see a dime of that money, you're a fricking moron. I will kill you first." He then walked away. For a second, my dad was worried the guy would get away with the threat, but he didn't worry much because the guy said it loud enough for the bailiff and the judge to hear. He did not make it out of the courtroom. My dad was a lawyer in the Navy. One of his first big cases was defending a guy accused of falling asleep at his post during Vietnam. My dad was all psyched, delivering what he thought was a well-prepared defense to the judge. The judge interrupted him, telling him to turn around and wake up his client. This guy might have had some kind of disorder. "Your Honor, the defense apparently rests." Accidentally admitted to the crime in his direct examination. Facepalm. How do you accidentally admit to a crime? "Sir, did you murder that woman?" "Yes, I did." "Wait, no, frick!" The case had gone on for years. Client was badly injured in a car accident and was about to win millions. Then she posted a Facebook status about her doing something very active and thus negating the entire case. Had to settle for $100,000. Years of work down the drain in one Facebook status. "Attorney, this is Jen from the judge's office. Your client, who I see is charged with harassing phone calls, left us 87 messages over the weekend. The judge would like a word with you. Let's not jump to any conclusions until we've discussed the contents of those calls, people. There's nothing harassing about..." "Hey, Your Honor, just calling to see what your plans are this weekend. Some of the guys are going to Larry's. You're more than welcome. See ya." Hey, Your Honor, didn't hear back but wanted to give you a heads up that if you are going to Larry's tonight, you should park a block east of his place. No restrictions on that block." "Whoa, Your Honor, there's some major traffic on Maple Street right now. Don't know if there was an accident, but steer clear of that place, big guy." "Hey, Your Honor, if you do happen to be headed to Larry's, could you pick up a bag of ice on your way? Thanks, bro." "Oh, Your Honor, I'm absolutely crazy. I can't believe I forgot to give you Larry's address. 1955 Crescent. A lot of girls here, by the way. Maybe wear those robes and catch you some strange. Get down here, bro." This client sounds like that ex that everybody has. Finally taken to court. I had a brilliant gentleman on probation for narcotics trafficking and was not permitted to own or use a cell phone. He went in for a substance test with his probation officer, and his cell rang in his pocket. The police officer went to take the phone from his pocket and also pulled out a large bag of white snow that he bought to his substance test. "She has a restraining order on you. You absolutely cannot contact her anymore." They moved in together. Fortunately, I was not the attorney in question, but guy is convicted of some traffic-related offenses, loses his driver's license, effective immediately, gets in the car and drives home, along with his lawyer. Not my client and not my case, but a colleague was defending a driver in a wrongful death case. The first question at his deposition was, "Please state your name for the record." The driver stood up and started screaming at the plaintiff's attorney and threatened to kill him. That went well. Didn't happen to me, but happened to an attorney I know. Client shows up for preliminary hearing on domestic violence petition, is wearing a ratty t-shirt, but his attorney doesn't pay attention to it. Attorney starts arguing and sees the judge turning bright red, fuming with anger. Judge asks the attorney if he spoke with his client about courtroom attire. Attorney looks down. Client is wearing a t-shirt that says, "I have the male organ, so I make the rules." Story is from a friend of mine. He was defending a guy in court, don't remember what he was charged with. The main witness for prosecution was on the stand and was asked if she could identify the defendant. She was scanning the courtroom and seemed confused. My friend was already silently celebrating because if she couldn't identify him, he could probably get all charges dropped. As he was mentally adding this case to the win file, he happened to glance over at his client, who had just helpfully raised his hand to make it easier for her to identify him. Even the judge face-palmed on that one. My law teacher would tell stories about a juvenile court he used to work in for one of the more questionable areas of California. Apparently, they had a real problem with defendants coming in with sagging pants and court officials showing up in beach clothes. The judge finally got so sick of it that he kept a box of rope for an impromptu belt and a box of neckties behind his desk, and he'd begin court proceedings by lobbing ample amounts of both over his stand at anyone he felt was in need of them. That's gotta be a bit terrifying, a judge throwing you a length of rope and commanding you to use it. The cops in my preliminary hearing showed up in camo shorts and beaters. I was wearing a suit and tie. I know of a judge who will hold you in contempt for showing up dressed inappropriately. Also, he hates, and by hates I mean hates, cell phones ringing during his proceedings. If your cell phone rings, you're immediately held in contempt, and the bailiff immediately handcuffs you and takes you to jail. Ah, the South. That judge seems to enjoy an atmosphere of fear and tension in his courtroom. Dizzy with power. I work as a legal aid lawyer in a Canadian province. I've had many dumb clients who did many dumb things. Wore a smoke grass every day t-shirt while attending their substance trafficking and producing trial. Attempted to smuggle cigarettes to their inmate partner via their baby's diaper. Initially pooped their pants on the way to court to delay their matter. Denied driving under the influence. Upon search by police, a full highball glass of rum and coke was located in their jacket pocket. Committed the unspeakable act on a girl. Sent her text messages from his phone the next day recalling all the sordid details. I have many more stories I could tell if there was sufficient interest. The ones I mentioned here all happened in the past couple of months. More stories. One of my first clients was a delirious hobo. When we were meeting at my office, he was ranting and his dentures fell out and landed on my legal pad. He picked them up and put them back in his mouth and continued to rant as if nothing had happened. Same guy appeared in court a few weeks later and refused to let the security detail inspect his hobo bindle. He told them that he wasn't going to appear without his bindle and left. He was arrested that afternoon for failing to appear. A guy came in and said he wanted to sue Oral-B because their toothbrushes kept cutting his gums. He asked if I wanted to see his evidence. I said no, but he still proceeded to dump a grocery bag of used, slightly bloodied toothbrushes onto my desk. Another good one, during a trial for a client in a circuit court about an hour outside of the city that I operate in, client decides to get a cab out there and tells the driver they'll pay them when they arrive. Client arrives in this community and gets the driver to stop at a local convenience store across the street from the courthouse. Client proceeds to attempt to steal 5 26-ounce bottles of rum and is promptly arrested and taken into custody. Trial is postponed as we spend the day unsuccessfully applying for bail. I'm not a lawyer, but this worked out super well for me. I was hit by this 65-year-old drunk lady who also happened to be on a substance at the time. The cops knew her husband was a firefighter, so they didn't breathalyze or do any tests and didn't charge her with DUIs. My EMTs had said, "That lady is so drunk, she's going to buy you a ticket to Disney World," which is how I knew that she was drunk at the time of the accident. But I had no proof to bring to the table in the lawsuit because if the cops didn't charge or make notes, you cannot add it later. So we get to my deposition and she shows up. She argues with me the entire time over my points, and her lawyer keeps having to tell her that she needs to be quiet. Mind you, this lady had ruined my friends' and mine lives. So I was becoming less than patient with her calling me a liar when she got off scot-free. She exclaims to my lawyer, "Even the police report is wrong." "What do you mean that it's wrong?" "It has me coming from the wrong place." "Where were you coming from?" "My friend's bar." "Really? Did you have any drinks at this bar?" Well, yeah." "How many?" "I don't know, and they don't charge me, they just keep refilling my glass." Cue to her lawyer's facepalm as all of this is on tape. Family law case. Judge had asked to interview the minor child in a closed courtroom with no parents. Attorneys couldn't stay. When done, the client re-enters the courtroom to see the child crying and tells the judge that he is fricking retarded. Right up to that point, my client was winning and was about to have the other party's parenting time suspended. The kid had said that the other party abuses him and that he did not want to see that parent anymore. The judge was not pleased. Other party's parenting time suspended. My client has anger management classes ordered, fines, psych testing, and substance testing. During a divorce, the ex-husband claimed that he didn't make much or any money and wasn't able to pay the child support we were asking him to pay. A few hours after receiving this information, he posts a picture on his public Facebook of a wad of cash talking about how ballin' he is. Needless to say, his claim didn't hold up after that. I suppose this whole collection of stories could just be called What Happens When People with No Filter End Up in Court. Acting in their own defense, of course, filed a motion to kiss my butt, in which he required that America at large and one corrupt judge bend over and kiss his butt. The motion was denied. I'm going to allow it. At first appearance, a defendant stood there calmly and quietly when the judge was reading his charges and bond information. When the judge asked if the defendant had any questions, the defendant gave the judge the finger and said, "Frick you motherfucker, go frick yourself," and then proceeded to throw down the microphone and walk away. The judge, who had been on the bench for years, replied, "Well, I guess I'll let you know when my fan club meets." Not a lawyer or in any way educated on law and court proceedings and such, so please forgive my ignorance, but I want to ask something. Say you're in court and your client does something horribly stupid, such as gives evidence incriminating himself accidentally, or confesses. What do you do? Do you just sigh, admit that you've lost, and everything stops there? Or is there any way to salvage that? Just a curious question. It really depends on the situation. 1. Real legal proceedings are rarely like Law and Order. People rarely straight up admit guilt on the stand. I have, however, had a client under oath get straight up caught in having told a lie 2 minutes earlier. Sometimes you ask for a brief recess and see if you can make the case go away. Sometimes you ask for a brief recess and take your client into the witness room and shout at them, then come back in and try to put lipstick on the pig on redirect. For example, you just said on cross that actually it was Y when you said X earlier. Why was that? Oh, sorry, I get confused. And sometimes you can't do a damn thing about it and you're just watching in horror from the counsel table. So I'm a law student, but I work at a volunteer desk that helps people complete the forms for court. The awful part is I can't give any legal advice since I'm not a lawyer, which means I can't tell these people they don't have a case. However, the stories are great. There's the lady who sues celebrities. She asked me to help her sue Robert De Niro. Someone else helped her with a suit for Matthew McConaughey. She was doing it on behalf of her kids and their fathers for in excess of $100 million. She didn't even know how to spell their names. Then there's the guy who's suing DirecTV, CNN, Fox, and who knows else. Apparently he's the one you have to thank for putting color on your TV shows and adding animation. He was suing because they hadn't paid him. Ever. Finally, there's a lady who's suing her former employers for giving her too much money on her last paycheck. She told me they did it because they liked her and wanted her to come back. There was maybe $60 extra on the check. She was suing for $10,000. Not a lawyer, but in court for a ticket. Apparently the cop lost the ticket book, so there was no official evidence. The judge said the next 15 on the docket, I was luckily one of these 15, just needed to say not guilty since there was no evidence. One moron got up there and started to argue that he was only going 5 miles per hour over the limit, not 10. The judge looked at him and said, "Son, just say not guilty." The guy again said, "But I wasn't going that fast." The judge laughed and repeated again, "Son, just say 2 words for me, not and guilty." The guy, confused, mumbled not guilty in the form of a question. The judge said, "Case dismissed." Everyone in the courtroom laughed and clapped for him. My high school best friend's father is a lawyer, and I remember him telling me this story years ago. He gets a client who's being charged with a DUI. He asks the client what happened, and the client states that he had 2 drinks, gets stopped, and the police wrongly charged him with driving under the influence. My friend's dad then looked over the evidence as any good lawyer would do. Comes to find out there was video evidence from a dash cam. Awesome. His client on video was visibly drunk, and he described it as being "you'd be stupid to think he was sober." He was convinced there wasn't much he could do with this. There's icing on the cake though. When the police officer went to give him the breathalyzer, his client is heard stating, "I'm too drunk to use this damn thing." I'm a law student, but I have internship stories. We had a client who was convicted of murdering his stepson. Before passing sentencing, the judge asked if he had anything to say to the court. He replied, "I only effed up when I didn't kill my wife too." Life sentence. Another client, upon being pulled over and being asked if he had any substances or alcohol in the car, voluntarily told the officer that he didn't, but he did have some smack that he sold in his hotel room. He then kindly escorted the officer there and gave it to him. We had a client charged with selling white snow. In order to determine if he qualified for public defender, the judge asked if he had any way to make an income, and he said, "Well, from selling white snow. I bet I can think of more, too." My lawyer brother once got a contempt of court charge dismissed against his client by begging for mercy, using a Forrest Gump-like defense. "My client is not a smart man." Immediately after the charge was dismissed, the client turned and in front of the entire court punched my brother in the mouth, yelling, "Who you calling dumb?" Client was promptly rearrested. Teachers who go to high school reunions, what are the most striking stories you've seen? Not a teacher, but a graduate from high school in a crystal-addled city in the South, actually featured on a list placing number 1 for the most addicted city in Georgia. I can say that everyone who was successful left and stayed gone. According to the Facebook event page, like 10 people went. Possibly related, who pays $60 per ticket to hang out in a school gymnasium for their 10-year reunion? Here, we're number 10 in this alphabetical list of most addicted counties by state. Also not a teacher, but have been out of high school, an all-girls school, for 6 years. At our 5-year reunion, I caught up with a girl who was severely bullied during high school. She fell off a horse in grade 8 while riding competitive and legitimately snapped her spine, and was in a very intense back brace for her entire high school career. And my God, the other girls were so nasty to her. She would get made fun of for her appearance, and there was an incident where someone filmed her in class without her knowledge and then edited the video to have all these sexual innuendos about her back brace, and it was posted on Facebook. Our principal was also a horrible woman, and when the video got reported to the principal somehow blamed this girl instead of penalizing the bully. She ended up having to stay back a year because her disability was so bad and she couldn't complete her schoolwork and was unable to graduate. She was incredibly religious as well, and the other girls used to make weird Christian incest jokes about her mum having to bathe her, because she couldn't bathe herself due to her back brace. Anyway, now she's doing some fancy medical degree in the UK and is pain-free and out of the back brace. She looks amazing, healthy, glowing, and rigorously kicks butt at the gym every day to physically rehabilitate her body. The best part of the story is that she has absolutely no ill will to the girls who bullied her. It upset her at the time, but she didn't let it scar her. She knew that her bullies were obviously insecure and dealing with some inner demons, if they went out of their way to ruin her life. She felt bad for them more than anything. I run into her at the gym all the time, and it's so nice to see her so confident and thriving. Nothing like a great recovery story to lift the spirits from the mire of high school misery. I sat beside this girl Joni in grade 8. She was so smart and really pretty. She would always finish the year with 95% averages, even as high as 98 in some subjects. I was a hooligan, that's why I was seated next to her. She would help me with stuff, always let me copy her homework, peek at tests. There's no way I would have passed without her. The teacher would always say you'll never get anywhere if you just copy Joni all the time. She works the drive-thru at A&W now, and has a herd of children with some skeezy-looking guy who's in and out of jail. Breaks my heart when I see her. So much potential to end up flipping burgers. I always wonder where it went wrong with her. 9 times out of 10, crappy home life. Just finally got to her. Found someone who loved her like she wasn't at home and got pregnant. If you only love you 20%, finding someone who loves you 30% is like winning the lottery. Not a teacher, but about a girl I used to be interested in since elementary school. We were really close friends. I'd even work for her dad when I was a kid. Stuffing envelopes for him to send out to his clients, just basic stuff that he offered us 10 cents per envelope to be a nice guy. In high school, we drifted apart a little, and she started dating another friend of mine who shortly after noped out of that relationship because she wanted him to make her pregnant. Fast forward a couple of years after graduation, and she did have children, who she then suffocated when they were 3 years old and 22 months old, sentenced to over 40 years in jail. She was smart, pretty, and charming, and now she might never see the outside world again. Needless to say, she didn't make it to the 10-year reunion. 13 dead out of 217, class of 11. 2 car wrecks, 1 took their own life, 1 dead soldier, 1 lost at sea, and the rest overdosed. We did a 5-year reunion because we lost like 4 of them during year 4. I swear, staying in your hometown after high school will kill you. Not a teacher, but there was a guy who was a stereotypical jock in high school. Very unemotional, stoic, etc. Then he went into the military and got PTSD. Now he's a hippie and a psychotherapist. The buttheads that graduated my year of 2001 tried to organize our 10-year reunion in 2010. Class of 2001 represent. My wife and I skipped our 10-year because it was literally a pizza party with an open bar and daycare. I'm not flying back for that. After the reunion, there was a big meltdown on the class Facebook page about how everyone was still in the same cliques as teenagers. None of the actually awesome people showed up. Maybe the 20-year will be better. It was not better. Not a teacher, but I went to my 10-year reunion. Back in high school, we had a kid who has Asperger's and was a little weird. He was, however, amazing at the yo-yo, having picked one up during middle school when we had that yo-yo trick assembly. Everyone else had stopped walking the dog in 8th grade. This guy was doing more and more elaborate tricks every day during lunch. He was bullied and teased, but he continued doing what he loved. So at our 10-year reunion, people from every strata of high school popularity there was, including this guy. He was his same old self, but more confident. I asked him if he still yo-yos, and he busted out his custom-made titanium yo-yo that he said he made on a CNC lathe. He then starts to do some tricks, and a large crowd gathered around. It was quite the show. He had gotten very good. When he finished, people clapped and cheered, and even the jockiest dudes from back in the day fist-bumped and told him how badass he was. The most amazing transformation was everyone else. Nobody teased him for being who he was anymore. They now admired him for being so passionate about something. I'm really hoping for a Kevin update one of these days. The narrator hopes this as well. To understand the context of the legend that is Kevin, check out one of our earlier videos, Teachers. What's your "that student definitely isn't going places" moment video? Kevin was a child with what I can only describe as a list of impressive achievements in stupidity. He was very entertaining to hear from, and one wonders how he'd got to 13 years old. In high school, I was pretty good friends with a guy that was a bit overweight, about 6'4", really smart and a bit nerdy. Lost track of him after high school, but then saw him at our 10-year reunion. He was the talk of the reunion. Still tall, but had lost all the weight and was in great shape, and had long hair like Fabio and was a doctor. He showed up with a beautiful wife. He then gave us his contact info and invited us to Atlanta to stay with him in his big house. After the reunion, I tried to get in touch. Contact info didn't work, and through some sleuthing I found out he was neither married nor a doctor. He was still in good shape, can't fake that, but faked everything else. He was still tall though. What if he showed up and he was like 5'5"? Now that's a story. Not really a surprise, but the guy who used to bully me all the time is basically homeless. He refuses to go back to his parents, absolutely nothing wrong with them, he just never got out of the rebel teen phase, and spends his nights either couch surfing at a mate's or sleeping on the streets if no one can take him in. Any job he gets, he stays at until he has enough money for whatever he wants at the time, and then quits. Skates all the time and wants to go pro, but spends all his time smoking green herb and drinking and then crying about his life doesn't go anywhere. People at the reunion were astounded that he had just not changed one bit. He still used the slang words he used back then, and even tried to get his old mates to tease me like they used to, but they didn't because they're all adults now with jobs, and some even have kids. He was kicked out of the venue because he tried to pick a fight with a guy who laughed at him for how he was dressed. 30-year-old man dressed as a teenager. I think it's important to note that this guy and I used to be close friends before he started bullying me. I know his parents weren't horrible because I saw his home life firsthand, and he'd lashed out at them for simple things and treated them both like crap. The worst I can say about them is that they were pushovers when it came to punishing him. There were a couple of guys like that at my 10-year anniversary. Walked in like they owned the place, thought the status quo hadn't changed, then fricked right on out the door and they realized that nobody really gave a crap about high school politics 10 years after the fact. I didn't go to my 20th, but saw the list of dead people. I tried to look them up in my yearbook, but shockingly, every single one of the 7 to 8 people were in the no picture section, which was maybe 5% of the class. So either the yearbook cast a curse, or there's some correlation between not being able or not wanting to take a yearbook picture and dying young. I have a few. One guy was the star pupil. Smart, handsome, athletic, everything. Dating the head cheerleader. Some Hallmark movie crap. They leave to go off to college and nobody thinks it'll go wrong. Come 10 years later, she divorced him, was given the house his late grandfather built in the divorce, and lived in there with her new lover while he was in a hotel. 10-year reunion happens, he's deathly skinny and depressed. Sees the school, remembers the memories he had, goes home after reunion, and takes his own life, leaving behind 2 little girls. His ex got chased out of the community last year. Death threats against her and her lover. She's trying to get back in contact with people now, because the lover took her money and fled back to the Philippines, and she's now homeless. I'm a middle school teacher of over 10 years, so some of my students are high school and college graduates at this point. I'm happy to say that a good number of them have reached out to me to share life stories and updates. The one student that came to mind was confidentially severely depressed from a broken home with identity issues and wanted to take her own life. She came to me for help, and we found spoken word poetry as an outlet for her emotions, anxiety, and discovery of self-worth. She's currently returning to high school to finish her associate's degree, and she was the first in her family to graduate high school. I get updates from her on my birthday each year. She still writes and performs spoken word poetry in her spare time. A former student of mine grew up in an ultra-conservative home. He and his siblings were never allowed to socialize with other students during lunch and recess. Whenever they had free time at school, they had to read their Bibles. In science class, they were forbidden to learn about evolution. Every essay, short story, personal narrative, and poem he wrote for me involved some kind of Christian theme. When he graduated, he immediately enrolled in a big seminary in our area, and that was the last I heard of him until his class invited me to their 10-year reunion. This same kid showed up with sleeve tattoos, piercings everywhere, slamming beer after beer after beer, and smoking like a locomotive. When I asked what he was doing now, he responded he currently worked as a bouncer at a strip club. You know what? I think the transition for this guy was probably at the very least a very interesting story. I hope this guy is happy with his new life. A frustrating thing as a teacher is not being able to remember all the kids you've taught. I've taught roughly 150 kids a year for 15 years, so it becomes hard to remember specific things about every student. I feel like a D-bag when a kid who really enjoyed my class comes up and asks me questions about life or the class he or she was in, and I can't remember much about it. I found that I usually remember high-achieving or creative students or kids who were behaved badly, as I have a soft spot for these kids. Since I usually remember the badly behaved kids, I have noticed that most of them figured it out by the time they reach 30. Most have great jobs and are well-adjusted. Conversely, many of the high-achieving students end up dropping out of college and are working low-wage jobs. I don't believe that high school is much of an indicator of future success. As long as you graduate high school and attempt college, how you performed in high school will not be that important. At a reunion, my English teacher told me to not be an English teacher. Then we started pounding wine, and I complimented her on her then recent publication of a romance novel. It was actually a great read. I commented that she had been clearly naughtier than I'd previously realized. Well, here goes nothing. Not a teacher. Well, technically I am, but this is a story from my reunion. But at high school reunion, everyone from my class was doing as well or better than could be expected, except for one guy. Let's call him John. At school, John was a smart kid, well-mannered, pretty quiet, and taller than everyone else. We were actually pretty good friends at the time, but lost touch after a while. This was before social networks. I know he went to university to study computer science, and the last thing I heard about him was that he'd gotten married and had 2 kids. Anyways, I was looking forward to seeing him and finding out what he was up to for the past 15 years, but he didn't show up. Later, the teacher told us that she'd tried to contact him, but no one knows where he is. He left one day to go to work and never came back. No bodies have been found. He hasn't contacted his wife or sister. He simply vanished into thin air. I tried finding him online numerous times, but to no avail. I still try from time to time. I just hope he's safe and well. Had my 10-year reunion in the last year. Lots of people came into town. During the actual reunion, there was a lot of bragging and obvious flexing. Fast forward to the end of the night and people are planning an after-party. I end up going to it, and the buzz that everyone had at the primary event is replaced with sloppy drunkenness, and the previous boastfulness is replaced with them all confessing their insecurities, their health problems, their loveless marriages, that they hate their jobs and bosses. Was a bit awkward. In my high school, they used some of the class reps as volunteers in order to organize this 10-year meeting. My at that time class master told me that a super good-looking woman, she was 29 back then, I was 17, and damn, she was top 3 women I've ever seen in my life, was one of the dirtiest students she had ever had. She would not shower for days, and at some point she was out of school for a week or so because she got a really bad infection from her period and a lack of showers. Also, one of the smartest guys from that generation, who went to veterinary school, was convicted for selling some sort of animal tranquilizers to people, and used some on himself. He seemed super normal, but when he spoke to you, you could tell that there were some clicks in his brain that were not connecting at all. Losing the idea in the middle of the sentence, couldn't keep the voice at the same tone for more than 10 seconds, going from whispering to shouting and stuff like that. Not a teacher, but I went to my 20th about 5 years ago. The woman organizing the event was in my class since 3rd grade and was always bright, intelligent, charming, and pretty. She was very active in high school and by all counts had a very bright future. Speaking to her at the reunion, it seemed that had happened for her. We talked about her self-help and life coaching company and how they're growing and doing great. I asked her to send me more information when I got home, which is on the other side of the country. I got an email from her introducing me to her West Coast partner, whose email was from the URL esplosangeles.com, which I thought sounded very contrary to what I was expecting. A quick look at their website had me immediately worried, and a short Google later I saw that they are an offshoot of the NXIVM cult that has been all over the news. The woman I was talking to that I knew since age 8 was Lauren Salzman, who just this week pled guilty to holding 2 trafficked victims who were subjected to the unspeakable act, locked in a room for 2 years. She was trying to recruit me and basically everyone at the reunion into NXIVM. I noped right out of the email conversation and have been watching everything unfold for the last 5 years. They're all looking at some serious jail time now. Wow, I can imagine some crazy stuff having happened in people's busy decades since school, but leading a cult branch and trafficking people wouldn't have been on my bingo card. Used to have this one kid in my art class in senior high who treated it like one of those easy-to-pass classes. He was a big guy, much bigger than the other students, and he had used his size and strength to bully other kids. The smaller ones, he was a little B-word underneath it all. He would draw guns and crosses in his art book with pseudo-gangster sayings like, "Live by the gun, die by the gun," and "F the police." You get the idea. Come reunion time, which was some 5 years later, he's found a girl who really reined him in, and kind of like a hunter taming a wolf, turned him into a really good man. They had a baby boy and he's a responsible father and does yoga on the rocks by the beach. Complete 180. I do think he was a good guy underneath it all, he just needed direction from someone who could break down his walls. Teacher here. You see defense mechanisms like these all the time in kids who have been destroyed by someone they trusted. Or they've been bullied and they're trying to scare people away before they have the chance to hurt them. Or sometimes the kid is just a psychopath. That happens, but more rarely. One of the best parts about being a teacher is when you actually get a defense mechanism kid to trust you, and others, so they stop being so freaking scary all the time. I was the girl version of this. Angry, self-harm, scary drawings and poems all over my books. I would light up in front of teachers just to get reactions and finished with a 0.5 GPA. 0.5. I was institutionalized twice. All it actually took was putting me into a supportive, unconditional environment. Now I'm working on my master's and learning a lot of skills I never realized I was missing. The only part that hurts is knowing the time I lost being in a toxic environment as a kid through high school. I hope my teachers from then know I'm doing okay. Going to post my mum's story because she doesn't have an account. She was a home economics teacher and specifically she had one class called Relationship Psychology, where every day to start her class, she would read through that cheesy Dear Abby newspaper advice column to talk with the class on how they would respond to the problem. One day ahead of class, she noticed that a letter published talked about a kid who sounded a lot like a student in her class and was located in our hometown. They always end the letter with a name and city, and my mum was always very involved with her students and their personal lives. The letter talked about a kid who was terrified of going into college and how he got rejected from all the schools he wanted to go to, had no self-confidence, abusive father, money problems, and that he would lose all of his close friends. He couldn't stand the idea of leaving his disabled mother, and that he felt enormous pressure as a first-gen college student and had ultimately decided not to go to college at all. She read it to the class and they discussed, and she could tell the boy in her class was very uncomfortable. After class, she asked him about it, and it was in fact a letter written by him. He never thought it would get published and responded to by the Dear Abby column and was super embarrassed. He, like other students, never even knew what the Dear Abby column was until they took her class. Afterwards, she talked through everything with him and talked with his mother and evaluated his options on how to best approach college. She taught him finances, loans, scholarship options, his mum's condition, and everything, and got him into a place where he could feel better about his future. 4 years later, the kid ended up being the speaker at his college graduation of over 7,000 kids, met his wife at college, all his groomsmen, and got a killer job through his career fair on campus before graduating. She flew out and attended as he invited her. Was always blown away by that. Like many others, I'm not a teacher, but a 35-year-old. I went to a high school in Venezuela. I left the country when I was 17 and never saw any of them until what you might call a virtual reunion on Facebook a few years ago. The reason I got to even know they had a group? The guy everyone knew bullied me was shot and killed by his best friend at the time. Apparently, he kept being a nasty piece of work after graduating, and this was the end result. Besides that, most of my classmates moved from the country due to the crisis. Those who stayed are having a bad time. Like everyone else in the country. It is weird seeing them in Facebook in random countries and doing things that I would never have expected from them as a teen. One is a cook in Sweden, one is an MMA fighter in California, one is an accountant in Australia, plenty have middle-class lives in other South American countries. Simply interesting. A student of mine went through a really tough time. His dad was actually convicted of attempted murder on his mother during his time at school, which sent the mum into a sort of apathetic depression. I walked him to the trial and I testified. I was in close contact with his therapist and social services. He's now a year from taking his master's in software engineering and he has a baby on his way. He's really happy now and his wife is the sweetest you'll ever meet. He told me that I was his role model for parenting. Made me cry. Like ugly, snot, can't breathe crying. I wish him all the luck in the world. He's going to be a great dad. Doctors, what was your dumbest, I am very smart, patient experience? RN here. I see some crazy stuff, but one thing that stands out was the time I was admitting a guy to the hospital. I can't really remember what for, but he was about 400 pounds, diabetic, heart disease, you name it. Anyhow, I'm at the computer going over some admission questions with him and his 10 family members who are crowded in the room with him. A few minutes in, he starts complaining that he's thirsty. He needs something to drink right now. So I get on my phone and call the nurse assistant and ask her to bring some ice water. As soon as the words are out of my mouth, the whole family screams, "No! No water! He's allergic to water!" Well, this is going to be a problem. Turns out the guy has been drinking nothing but Sprite and sweet tea for years because of his water allergy. The next question the wife had was, where are we all supposed to sleep? The whole family, 10 people, were planning to stay at the hospital with him. You can't make this crap up. I work in the ER. We had a very pregnant patient come in needing stitches in her hoo-ha. Turns out she was a realtor and didn't want her water to break while she was showing a house, so she put a glass cup in her pants to catch the water. Instead of using a pad or an adult diaper, she went for a glass cup. She sat down while showing a house, and sure enough, it broke and cut her up pretty bad down there. As a male who doesn't have the same anatomy as the woman in this story, I can tell you that I'm still in immense sympathetic pain right now. Oh, I have one. I got this from my friend, who's a doctor in the children's ward in a rural hospital. The parents bring in their child whose hair is infested with lice. The lice were visible to the naked eye and could be seen crawling on the child's clothing. While the medical staff examined the child in order to determine a course of action, they discovered the child was covered in white powder and smelled heavily of chemicals. They asked the parents what were the substances and the smells emanating from the child. The parents said, quite matter of fact, it was 7 powder, and the flea and tick spray they used on their dogs on the family farm. Needless to say, social workers were notified about this case. 70-year-old female tripped and fell 2 days ago. She came up with hip pain, but reports after the fall her nose was bleeding. She had landed on her nose. About a year prior, her dentist had messed up an infraorbital nerve block and caused some swelling in that region, but that was all solved. This old lady is now convinced her nosebleed after falling on her face is related to an infection from the dental issue a year ago. After multiple back and forth on the etiology of the nosebleed, she became the first patient I raised my voice and put down an authoritative, "No, you're just wrong, just stop it." Work for an optometrist, and it was the month before school started, and a woman brought in her son to have his eyes checked for the first time. Seems like a pretty reasonable thing for any parent, even if he was a little older than usual for the first eye exam. Better late than never, I guess. The mum was well-spoken and appeared fairly intelligent. Everything went as normal, the doctor examined the boy and ended up prescribing glasses. When the doctor was explaining to the mum that her son had to wear his glasses all the time, since he's nearsighted and basically can't see clearly past 5 inches in front of him, and will definitely need glasses for school. For some reason, this caused a switch to flip in the mum and she spazzed out on the doctor, saying that her son doesn't need glasses, that the doctor is only saying that he does because he wants to sell glasses. She says that she only brought her son in because there was some form for school that needed to be filled out, and the doctors are all con artists trying to push unnecessary medications and interventions. The doctor tried to calm her down and explain that he's only trying to help them, but that she was free to get a second opinion and give her kid a copy of the kid's prescription and sent them on their way. About 4 months later, the lady is back asking for another copy of the son's prescription. Apparently, the first semester midterm results were in, and her son had failed all of them because he couldn't see the board in his classes and needs, guess what, glasses. Something similar happened with my mother when she was a kid. If I recall the story correctly, she was about 3, and she had always sat real close to the TV. My grandma kept scolding her for lying because she could see just fine. Well, Grandma got tired of hearing excuses and took my mom to the optometrist. The optometrist told her in no uncertain terms that she was nearsighted and needed glasses. My grandma was shocked at the news. Came back later to get the glasses, and on the way out, my mom just looks up at her mom and says, "Mommy, I can see you." My grandma just crumbled in tears at that. Me, is there any chance you could be pregnant? Patient? Definitely not. Are you doing the deed with anyone right now? Yes. What is your preferred method of birth control? Nothing. Shoot me now. Any variation of this, which I get all the fricking time. Me. So how are things going with your diabetes? Them. I don't have diabetes. Then why are you taking metformin, Victoza, or whatever? I used to have diabetes. Then replace diabetes with hypertension, anti-hypersensitives, etc., or when I ask them what medical diagnosis they have and they say none while taking a ton of meds, or when they misname a body part, prostrate, tendant, nuterus, to name a few. Oh hey, my doctor remembers all of my visits. That's nice. He was so good when he took out my inflamed appendix. Not a doctor, but I'm a nurse who worked in the OR at a trauma center. Was doing surgery on a 19-year-old substance user who tested positive for crystal and white snow, who was grilling the anesthesiologist about every drug we were going to use in surgery because he doesn't like putting chemicals in his body. Gotta stick with that organic, fair trade, non-GMO white snow. Oh, and on a similar note from the trauma center, guy is trespassing in a junkyard and gets his arms and legs screwed up by a pit bull. Have to clean out all these wounds. Flash forward to 3 a.m. that night, I get called in to do a case. Apparently the guy left the hospital AMA to go get revenge on the dog, and the dog bit him in the face, breaking some facial bones and poking a few more holes in the process. Classic. Most of my own stories go along similar lines to patient has chest pain driving a coachload of schoolchildren, thinks it's indigestion, swigs a bottle of Gaviscon, later diagnosed with huge heart attack. My favorite ever story from a colleague, a patient comes into A&E with abdominal pain. As part of the work, he gets an abdominal x-ray, which shows the problem as clear as day. The colleague then has proceeded to remove from the patient's rectum an 8-inch replica of Nelson's column, the statue in the centre of Trafalgar Square, London. On showing it to the patient, the response was, "Oh, that's Nelson. He lives up there." I've got 2 stories that stick out in my mind. The first is the mother of a toddler who came into the ER. The kid had cruddy green and bloody stuff coming out of his left nostril and a lot of redness and swelling of only the left side of his nose and the adjacent cheek. Mum was sure he caught a sinus infection and just wanted some antibiotics. Now, I know some kids like shoving whatever will fit into their body orifices, and that this was more than likely given the one-sided nature of his condition, but Mum was insistent that he never puts things in his nose. It took some convincing, but I finally got her to let me take a look. Gave a squirt of midazolam in the good nostril to settle him, then dug in with some tweezers through the crud until I pulled out a big old button battery. Would have been burning his nose for a couple of days. Hopefully, he healed up well. Side note, if a kid swallows a button battery, it can do similar things to their esophagus. This was an emergency and needs to be dealt with ASAP. When I was a medical student, I did an overnight ambulance ride-along. It was a slow night, so I was excited when dispatch called about what sounded like a stroke or a loss of consciousness. We zip over there, and the paramedic knocks on the door of a darkened house. A man opens the door slowly and says, "Oh yeah, she's in the back room." My sense of foreboding grew as we slowly made our way through the dim house, wondering what awful sight I would see back there. Just before we get to the back room, the light flicks on and this spry elderly woman practically bounces out of the room, carrying her bag of meds, cheerily saying, "Oh good, hello gentlemen, let's go to the dining room and I'll tell you what's been happening." She explains how she's on meds for high blood pressure, but instead of taking them as prescribed, she takes more or less depending on how she's feeling or something. Before bed, she took her BP on her home automatic machine, and it was a little high, so she kept repeating it and the numbers kept going higher and higher. She thought she was going to stroke out, so called 911. Of course, they were going up because she was freaking out about the previously high numbers, causing a vicious cycle. Even though both I and the paramedic knew she was more than likely fine, neither of us were doctors, so we had to take her to the hospital for assessment. So yeah, either she didn't understand her meds and the machine properly, or she thought she was too smart to follow her doctor's instructions. Patient had a hard time getting pregnant. Finally conceived, but miscarried. Patient has a D&C so she can try again, this time with medical intervention. We monitor her blood to ensure the pregnancy hormone has gone before beginning the treatment, but she keeps coming back with high levels of hormone. Docs are worried because she might have retained placenta or pituitary disorder, and this could be super bad for future fertility. We call her in for a conversation about the hormone levels not going away. After talking together about what might be wrong, they are going home and think about further tests. She says, "I need to go. I have an appointment at the weight loss center for an HCG shot." Turns out she is on the HCG diet. HCG is the pregnancy hormone. And this was after an hour of the doc saying, "We don't know why you have these constant high levels of HCG in your blood, and we're worried." Had a young woman with recurring UTIs that began after a recent partner and with no STDs. Went through the standard questions trying to figure out what could be causing them, and eventually found out she had been lubricating with jelly. Not KY jelly. The mix-up had literally been a joke in the house afterwards. It took me some effort to keep a straight face, but eventually we resolved the problem and she stopped getting UTIs. Oh dear sweet lord. Not only did she do this, but her partner must have at the very least just decided to go ahead anyway, or even worse, also thought it was a perfectly fine substance to use. Oh, I have two good ones that come to mind. Clinical pharmacist here, by the way, with one story in the ER and one in the pharmacy. ER physician told me this one. 16-year-old boy presented to the ER with an extremely swollen, discolored eggplant. Apparently, he's been using his mum's insulin needles to draw blood out of his arm and inject it into his own member. He thought that adding blood would help increase his size. His eggplant was terribly infected and he was hospitalized for a week or so. One day in the pharmacy, a girl comes to the counter requesting a refill for her birth control. We pulled up her profile and realized we couldn't refill it because she just got a 28-day fill less than 2 weeks ago. When we asked what happened to the other one, she said she was out. Apparently both her and her boyfriend were each taking a pill each, and was adamant that was how they needed to prevent pregnancy. I'm a corpseman, not a doctor, but I once had a patient tell me there was no credible research that smoking was bad for one's health. Okay. Optician here. We had a patient who refused to let us use the tonometer, a machine for checking ocular internal pressure to diagnose glaucoma. He said that puff machine gives you glaucoma, and we weren't going to pull that on him. He told us his father got an exam and had glaucoma after using that machine. His uncle and brother also had no signs of glaucoma, and after getting the puff test, both people had been diagnosed with the disease. Glaucoma doesn't have any outward symptoms before you start going blind. The moron just told me he has a very strong familial disposition to glaucoma and refused to be tested for it. Also, puff isn't that bad, guys. Try contacts. Your eyes stop fighting back pretty quick. The puff is a lot better than the old machine. It just hits you on the eyeball with a little ball on a lever. I've also had plenty of patients that don't understand family history. I interview patients directly so we don't have any real paperwork, and too many people can't answer simple questions. Do you or any direct families also have diabetes? Yes. Yourself or your family? Alternately, if yes to family members, they start listing their spouse's family or stepchildren. That's not how genetic disposition works. After getting no answers to diabetes, hypertension, glaucoma, thyroid problem, heart problems, etc., I ask if they take any medications. Yeah, atorvastatin, thyroidazine, metformin, and low-dose aspirin. Oh, so you have everything I asked about. Check. You want some more? Way too many people don't understand presbyopia. As you age, your lens hardens and can't focus up close anymore. Of course, when this is explained, I get a lot of people who believe they're way too young for bifocals. No, 60 is not too young for bifocals. Why doesn't the doctor wear bifocals? He does. He's wearing progressives, you don't see the line. Or, after trying to get used to multifocal lenses for a few days, giving up and demanding we remake them as singular vision, and then getting mad at me when they can't read with them. I never needed bifocals before, why can't you just make me regular glasses? Regular glasses always worked just fine. Yeah, you used to be 20. Also, you came to see us because you can't read with your regular glasses. In the same vein, these same people complaining about their insurance to me because progressives are expensive. Aligned bifocal is covered entirely. Progressives cost a lot more. I can't have lines in my glasses like an old person. Then you want progressives. This easily triples the bill. Why are you so expensive? I need to be able to see. Yeah, you need a bifocal, you don't need a progressive, you want a progressive. Insurance pays for what you need, not want. I actually had a guy make me talk to his insurance agent about him needing medically necessary progressives. A progressive lens is never medically necessary. Stop being cheap and listen to what I say. I'm not a salesman, I'm a medical professional. Stop acting like you know better than me. I'm going to trust that this person is actually a medical professional here to rant with his colleagues because I don't understand half the words he said. Oh, we've had a patient with cataracts tell us the optometrist was incompetent. She couldn't possibly have cataracts because she doesn't have cats. This was also the patient with 6120RE and 660LE, and binoc VAs tell us we were lying and just trying to sell him glasses. We weren't. It was a government-mandated acuities test and we aren't permitted to make sales off them. His logic, he hasn't been for a sight test in 17 years, so there's no way he needs glasses. He got back into his car and drove off. We've never sent paperwork back to the authorities so quickly. 80-plus-year-old patient who was declining with multiple diagnoses and about 3 decubitus ulcers. Daughter was adamant that her father be kept on his strict paleo diet because that would supercharge his healing. She had a stack of diet books. He simply wasn't getting enough nutrition to heal the ulcers. He didn't like the diet at all, by the way. At some point, you kind of have to stop being polite and just tell patients or family members bluntly that you don't have time for this crap and what you recommend and they can do what they want, and just document everything. It happens a lot, but she sticks out. Oh yeah, we had an elderly woman with severe malnutrition and her hippie daughter wanted us to only give her raw, unpasteurized goat's milk. We did everything we could to convince her that her mother wasn't getting enough nutrition. We even tried to allow her to bring in the raw, unpasteurized goat's milk that we would supplement with the FDA-approved formula that we wanted to give her mother through the feeding tube. We finally had to become pretty blunt with the daughter and let her know that her mother was going to die due to malnutrition due to the daughter's unique views on what was a proper diet for her mother. All the time. I'm a veterinarian and I can't tell you how many clients want to explain to me that their pet's illness can be fixed if they're fed a raw diet or a grain-free diet or fish oil supplements, whatever. Sure, come back to me when your dog's huge mammary mass ulcerates and starts leaking pus everywhere and we can reevaluate how well her raw diet is working to fix that. I'm a dental student. One patient in particular is a pathological liar. During one visit, they claimed to have gone to medical school. Next visit that they did, dental army. Last visit was that they had a PhD. The patient will say things like, "Hey doc, do you need me to move my head mesial or distal?" "No, I need you to move your head right." "Hey doc, are these cavities being caused by the anaerobic pathology microbes?" "No, they're caused by you eating snacks all day and not brushing." Not my story, rather my colleague's. A patient was admitted for anemia and a localized cancer was found. She referred to surgery so that she can get cured from her localized cancer, and she just started telling everyone that it was the doctors who caused the cancer, and that she was doing just fine before coming to the hospital. She lectured the surgeon and my colleague who pleaded her to get her surgery so that the cancer doesn't advance, and yet she refused, saying she knew better and probably didn't even have cancer. ERRN here, not a physician, but you may find this interesting. Young adult male presents with multiple abscesses on various parts of his body. States he injected his boyfriend's splooge into himself trying to get pregnant. He tells one of the APCs he should have gone with his original plan and tried it on his dog first. The psych clears him. He's admitted to the floor and gets IV antibiotics. WTF. The things that we read for you, dear listeners. I hope that at least some of you enjoyed that, because I need to go and evacuate my dinner, then cry about the state of the human race. Where to start? Here's just a few of my stories. Picture a middle-aged man, his index finger is 5 times the size of the rest of his fingers. It smells, it's leaking pus, there's necrotic tissue, basically one huge infected, cancerous finger. He was a firm believer in not taking any sort of medication, including antibiotics or chemo. Died a few weeks later, but he did manage to tell us that we were all idiots before he passed away. Patient was a young child who came in with an extremely high blood glucose level. Once she was stable, we did some teaching and kept her for a few days of observation. For some reason, every time I checked her, her levels would be extremely high, although we were appropriately treating her. Turns out her family would bring her fast food for every meal and hide it in the side table. More teaching and resources were put into place. Had a mum in hysterics because she was convinced that her mother's, friend's, stepson's, teacher's dog has MRSA, so her baby was going to die. It took everything within me to not tell her that most of the hospital staff have MRSA, but it took 3 hours for me to finally calm her down after I called infectious control, her pediatrician, gynecologist, and family doctor. Yes, I had to call all of these people. Yes, they laughed at me. Yes, she was beside me the whole time, questioning their judgment. I love my job, but at times it makes me crazy. Not a doctor, but a gastro nurse. We had a recurring patient who was just a really very strange lady. She had a stoma that absolutely stank to the high heavens because the last 20 years she has not been cleaning it properly. Every single day her stoma would come off because she was twisting the drain tube and wouldn't allow us to change it. So this lady was really rude and would shout at us too, and one night shift I couldn't take it anymore and I snapped at her. I didn't yell, but I was overly stern about the fact that if she did not let me clean it and treat her stoma, then the MRSA that she wasn't able to get rid of because she refused Hibis scrub washes would eat her alive. In hindsight, I didn't handle that very well, but she let me change the stoma. So this entire ordeal, she's yelling at me that her stoma bags are not cut to fit her stoma, that they are too small because her stoma is 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters, to which I corrected her, saying that's impossible. She was adamant that's how big her stoma was. It was 30 millimeters in diameter. When I was cleaning the stoma, she yelled at me because it was hurting, so she just wanted to pop the new one on. I explained it was hurting because of her infection because she never cleans it. She proceeded to tell me that she knows better because she's had the stoma for nearly as long as I've been alive. I eventually tell her to shut up and let me do my job, which seemed to work, and the stoma did not come off again that shift. When she was eventually discharged, she refused every placement to the point where we almost considered a court order to evict her. One of our F1s nearly cried with relief. Have you ever found yourself in a very dangerous situation suddenly easily solved by someone else? 2 days ago, I was picking up my lunch at McDonald's. It was rush hour, so I'm just searching for a free seat, and I found one near to a huge guy, suit-dressed. He was not fat, just huge. So I'm eating and just looking absently at people in the room, thinking about my job, my life, and banging, of course. I saw the usual folks you'd expect to find at a fast food. Suits, moms and kids, guys, and the omnipresent D-bag. Hat, tank top, overdeveloped biceps, tattoos, absurd tan. You know, the Jersey Shore kind of stereotype. The D-bag was with his female trophy. Great body, but her face was ugly as a kick in the mouth. Jesus Christ, I can't find words to say how she was ugly. She reminded me of Picasso. So I continue looking around while eating, and I may have crossed my look with the D-bag and his trophy a couple of times for nanoseconds. The giant rose, and while he was picking his tray, the D-bag yelled at me, "What are you looking at?" I was like, me? The D-bag stood up and yelled at me again, "What the frick are you looking at?" Suddenly, the giant, with the tray in one hand, turns around to see what's happening and approaches the D-bag, puts one hand on his chest and slams him back into his seat, then points a finger at him and says, "Shut the frick up, idiot." The giant takes a quick look at the girl, turns back to me and says, "Yeah, man, what are you looking at here? Just a fake chest, nothing more." Another quick angry look at the D-bag, then the giant proceeds to the trash can with his tray. The D-bag grabs his mortified girl and quickly rushes to the door, and I'm still at the table with a Coke in my hand and the WTF look unchanged. Don't know exactly how that happened, don't know who the giant was, but my Big Mac was a little cold, that's all. Well, I think we can agree that every man in this story, including the author, is a terrible person and move on to the rest. I worked as a chef in a very nice restaurant in Cleveland, Ohio in the mid-1980s. I was located near a very bad neighborhood and some of our dishwashers lived in that neighborhood. I was a young, white kid from the suburbs and one of the dishwashers was a black man in his late 30s named Harold, who went by Hurl. No idea why. Anyway, Hurl and I became friends. He was a rather jovial guy and he was interested in cooking, so I taught him a few things and eventually got him promoted from dishwasher to cook. He was actually quite good and loved the new job, and me for helping him out. One day, he asked me if I wanted to go out and party with him after work. Being young and adventurous, I took him up on his offer and into the neighborhood we went. For those of you familiar with Cleveland, it was the Howe Avenue neighborhood. We eventually ended up in an after-hours club, which is where all the drunk people ended up when all the bars were closed. I was wandering around a smoke-filled room with lots of very seedy-looking people, and I was quite drunk myself at the time. I ended up in a corner somewhere, surrounded by a small gang of people wondering who I was. They started closing in on me, and one of them asked if I had $1 I could give him. I felt my skin get clammy, and I realized I was about to get jacked by some drunk guys in a bad neighborhood. Suddenly, Hurl shows up, looks at the guy asking me for $1 and says, "He with me." Hurl has a look on his face I've never seen before, a lot more menacing than anyone in the gang surrounding me. The gang immediately changes their tune, and suddenly I'm their friend, and one of them asks me if I'd like a beer, and offers me one he has been drinking. I respectfully decline, and Hurl and I move away. Hurl looks at me, still with that menacing look, and says, "Anyone come up to you in this hood, you tell them you with Hurl. They know me, and they know I don't play. Good to know." This was in Karachi, Pakistan in the late 90s. We were at my uncle's place who was renovating his house. He had a small cement mixer set up behind the house, which was taking up some of the alley. Usually, when someone is building a house, the cops will show up and say the mixer is illegal and ask for a bribe to turn a blind eye. Problem is, on this particular day, pretty much all the cops started showing up one by one. Each one would say, "Pay us more and no one else will bother you." And a few minutes later, a new police van would show up saying the same thing. We had enough and stopped paying them. This teed off one of the cop vans and a couple of officers showed up at our door. We kids opened it and the officer asked us to come with him. He took us to the end of the valley where 5 to 6 cops were standing, AK-47s drawn. We all crapped bricks while the officer kept saying, "Why won't your parents pay? Why won't your parents pay?" Things were not looking good. Luckily, one of our neighbors saw the cops rounding up kids and walking us away. He was a big shot in a major gang. He left his house, got on his motorbike and drove over to where we were stood. Told the cop, "Let them go, if you know what's good for you." The cops left. No one bothered us again until the construction was done. Another Karachi story in the same vein. Every now and again there's a general strike in Karachi, which is enforced by local gangs. By enforced, that means they'll gun down anybody who leaves their houses. It's not always that bad, but this is the threat. During one of these strikes, my uncle's aunt, not the same uncle as the last story, fell sick and had to be taken to hospital, which was right around the corner from my uncle's place. You could walk to it. My uncle was at the hospital all day looking after her and decided to head home in the afternoon. Streets were deserted and he made haste. When he was literally 20 meters from his home, a gang of bikers saw him, chased him and cornered him. They asked why he was out during the strike and he tried explaining. They'd have none of it. They had their weapons leveled at him while he backed up against the gate to his neighbor's home. He banged at their metal gate for help, but who the hell would come out in that situation? Suddenly, a car drives by, black with tinted windows. A window rolls down and says, "Let this one go." Bikers left. Uncle sprinted for his house, got in, and started shaking uncontrollably. And that's how we found him, and he told us this story. Chef-related story. My mother and father used to own a restaurant in San Francisco. It was south of Market at a time when that was an exceptionally bad area. They hired this really nice Mexican guy, Juan, to wash dishes and do work in the kitchen. They were, however, down a chef, the previous one quit all of a sudden, and hired this new guy on short notice. So it's the first day, the restaurant starts to fill up for lunch around 11:30 or so. Normally a number of dishes would be prepped for the first few people coming in for lunch. But this guy, in spite of his frantic running around the kitchen, had nothing ready. So my mother walks into the kitchen and says, "Hey, what's the deal?" The guy tells her aggressively that he's getting the stuff ready. Wait another 40 minutes, still no one had gotten their meals. My mother walks back into the kitchen and this guy reels around with a butcher knife, walks up to her and waves it in her face, says, "Get the frick out of my kitchen." The next thing, Juan, who'd been watching this exchange, bends down to his boot, pulls out a carving knife, grabs the chef by the throat, and pushes him up against the stove. The guy drops the butcher knife and pretty much craps himself. He then runs out of the restaurant, swearing everyone to heck. My mother, after crying a few minutes, realizes that she's screwed because she has no one to cook lunches for the 70 or so people waiting. Juan says, "Do not worry," puts on an apron and cooks up all the lunches with lightning speed. And they were great lunches. I had one of them. The chef came back a few weeks later apologizing. He said it had a really bad white snow habit that he was now dealing with. Juan was employed from that day on as head chef. Good old Juan. Total bamf. I don't miss working with some chefs and the insane substance-induced problems that would arise because of those particular guys. I got cornered for a beating in a new high school surrounded by about 20 kids. This one kid who I met a day earlier casually walked along a fence rail through the crowd and swiftly kicked the lead kid in the face. End of story. Saved me from a beating like he was James Dean. Never got to thank him. A guy who was harassing me in a bar got ejected. I learned he waited outside to attack me. Another patron apparently witnessed what went on in the bar, saw the guy laying for me, and sucker punched him. When I was about 14, it was summer and we lived by the sea. My dad had a dinghy in the loft from the 70s along with paddles, and me and a guy called Peter H. took it out down the beach. Minus paddles. Bad idea. We went with Peter's brother and were carefree, messing about in the dinghy when we realized we were drifting out to sea. We got out, started paddling, and trying to swim back, and couldn't touch the bottom. We kept trying in vain and in the end realized we were screwed. This was the northeast coast of England in the North Sea. Temperature was about 4 degrees. We shouted to his brother on the beach, now about 150 meters away, to get help. Unbelievably, some guy walking on the beach stripped down to his pants and swam out. Dropped everything and swam out. He came to us, grabbed the boat that we were clinging to, and swam us back to shore. We got dry next to some fishing boats and lent him a towel before saying thanks. I genuinely believe he got us out of a lot of trouble, and I never even got to find out his name. I was working in a specialty running shoe and vitamin store, and this guy came in and walked around for a while, just kind of looking at different things. Said he didn't need help when I asked him about it. About 15 minutes later, when the store clears out, he comes up to the front counter and pulls out a fairly large knife and demands the money out of the cash register. Being 17 at the time and feeling a half panic, half anger, I started to talk loudly. "All right, I'll give you the money, don't hurt me," hoping that the cashier at the store next to mine would hear and call the police. The walls were thin and would mess with each other as such. My dad's friend is a cop in the town and every so often will randomly show up at work to mess with me. Sometimes this comes in the form of pretending to do a SWAT raid through the back door, which was directly behind the register. I don't lock the door while I'm working, so my boss usually just stopped by 2 to 3 times to walk in and check something and leave. This time, my dad's friend just strolls in yelling something about terrible service and what a bad employee I am. Sees the guy with the knife out and pulls out his service weapon. Guy drops knife, gets arrested. The one day I'm incredibly happy that my dad's friend comes in to screw with me. That must have been confusing for everyone that heard that. "Man, this service is terrible. Get to the ground! You're under arrest!" I was at Pismo Beach in California, about 13 years old at the time, boogie boarding and not really paying attention to the fact that the current had been pushing me closer and closer to the pier. I guess I figured when I start getting too close, I could just easily swim away and that would be that. When I realized that I was going to be slammed into the mussel and fishing hook encrusted pillars soon if I didn't start moving away, I began to swim the opposite direction. This is when I realized that swimming against the current is much harder than swimming with it. I started paddling furiously and began panicking because I wasn't making any progress. With each wave, I was being pushed closer to the pier. It would just be a couple more cycles before I started bouncing around underneath the pier. That's when I noticed a man standing in the water next to me. It was about waist deep. Feeling like an idiot, I slid off my board, stood up, and walked to shore. When I was in high school, I worked at the local video store. It was a small town and everyone knew one another. Anyway, these 2 thuggish black guys who were the main smack or white snow dealers for the hood would come into the store once a month and intimidate me into getting rid of their late fees because they never bought anything back on time. My boss finally caught on and told me that I couldn't do that anymore, no matter how scary they were. So they show up a week later expecting me to waive their fees. I explained to them that I could potentially get fired, but I would do it for them one last time. They actually understood and were appreciative. As they were walking out, they gave me their pager number and said that if I ever needed anything, to call them, and I assumed they meant I could call them for green herb, white snow, or whatever else they dabbled in. So I just kind of ignored it and went about my life. Flash forward a few months and I'm hooking up with this girl who had just broken up with her super redneck boyfriend. Mr. Redneck was not pleased when he found out about the situation. He showed up at the video store one night with some moron friends and informed me they would be waiting for me in the parking lot and they were going to beat the crap out of me after I closed the store for the evening. I still had several hours before close and as time went by, several more truckloads of rednecks showed up. I was really starting to sweat. There were 15 to 20 dudes just waiting to teach me a lesson. It seemed there was no way to get out of this beating. Out of sheer desperation, I paged the scary drug dealer guys. They called me back pretty quickly. I explained what was going on and asked if they could help me out. They told me not to worry, they'd be there shortly. I didn't know what to expect. I continued my closing duties while I waited for them to show up. Once I turned the lights off to the store, the mob in the parking lot started getting riled up. They were yelling and taunting me through the windows. I had run out of things to do in the store, and the dudes I had paged still hadn't shown up. As I was setting the alarm and mentally preparing for a demoralizing butt-whooping, a procession of hoop ties pull into the parking lot and circle the trucks. I watched from the windows as the dealers and their friends pulled out guns and told the rednecks in no uncertain terms that I was not to be messed with. To this day, I have never seen people scramble so fast. There were literally tire marks in the parking lot from all of the trucks peeling out to get away. This one event led to me never being screwed with again by anyone in my hometown. It was pretty nice. I could talk all the crap I wanted with impunity since everyone was so scared of those guys. Good times. In conclusion, multiple rednecks wanted to beat the crap out of me over a girl, and scary substance dealers saved me. I wonder if he resumed waiving their late fees after that particular incident. Car wreck on my way to school a few years ago. My little Honda Civic versus a large semi-truck. I blacked out for a short period. When I realized what happened, I couldn't get my car door open. The window on my side was slightly open from the crash, and I started panicking, thinking the car is going to explode or something. Random stranger next to the car goes, "Calm down, try the other door." So I climb over the center console and get out of the car. How about a non-human stranger? I was about 8 or 9 walking home from school. About a block from my house, some random pit bull runs up to me and starts growling. Scared the crap out of me. I figure I'm at death's door when out of nowhere another dog came to my aid. I believe it was a German Shepherd. This dog ran to my side and started barking at the pit bull until it left. I don't know this dog and I don't believe I ever saw him or her again. It was a pretty surreal situation. No crap, the exact same thing happened to me. We had a German Shepherd Husky mix, greatest dog in the world, and one day I was playing outside on my big wheel or something when the neighbor's pit bull came running after me. Sebastian came out of nowhere and tackled the other dog before it could get to me. He ended up getting pretty hurt, needing stitches and whatnot, but he scared the pit bull back to the neighbors and most likely saved my life and my face. My parents say that from that point on, he never let me or my siblings out of sight when we were outside. I was riding a bus in Brooklyn. I was trying to get some new bus routes instead of the subway because they could often be faster. I was going up into a very rough part of Brooklyn, basically Eastern Bedford, Stuyvesant. I was going to where the bus crossed the subway line. I'm the only white guy on a bus full of black people, which in itself was not unusual. An old guy sitting on the bus walks over to me and says, "You need to get off the bus now. You can't go further. It's not going to end well for you." I don't know if he saw something specific or was speaking in general. He was sincere. I got off the bus and walked a few blocks to catch a transfer from there. My family and I were the only ones on a deserted beach in Florida. I was being stupid and about 11, decided to swim a little far from the beach and get caught by an undertow. I remember the desperate, futile feeling of swimming harder towards land but seeing it get further and further away. Since only now my family was there and my parents weren't good at swimming, I was a goner. Out of nowhere came a strong swimmer, told me to calm down, gave me a flotation device, and swam me back to the beach. Before I could properly thank him, he disappeared. I had recently moved to the Columbia Heights neighborhood in northwest DC a few years ago, and for those who don't know, the Columbia Heights was really bad about 10 years ago, but is in the process of gentrifying. The neighborhood is pretty culturally and racially diverse, and I could afford it. One day I was walking home from work and was about 2 blocks from my house but slightly off the beaten path on a mostly empty street. I had my earbuds, which isn't always the safest thing to do just because you can lose situational awareness. I also had a laptop bag with no laptop, which again isn't all that smart. Anyway, a dude is walking toward me on the sidewalk and is around my age. We make eye contact and he says something unintelligible to me and I say something like, "Sorry," assuming I was either in his way or he was begging. I notice he has bloodshot eyes and if I had to guess, this was probably a smackhead. I angle my body towards him as we pass each other and the next thing I know he is grabbing for my earbuds. He pulls them out of my ears but doesn't quite get them as I jump back. I'm sort of in shock, but I've been in fights before, but not when I had no build up to the moment. I think I yelled something like WTF, and as he was coming at me again, I was thinking I probably could take the guy, but I should try to avoid blood, hitting his teeth with my fists. I don't know why my first thought here was risk of hepatitis, rather than maybe that I should just run my butt away, which would have been much smarter. But as he comes at me again, some unseen man is in front of me and pushes the dude away. Smackhead then stands his ground, and damn if the man doesn't just push him again and then starts yelling at him to get the frick out of the neighborhood and berating him over and over. Smackhead turns toward Main Street and begins to move quickly away. The man is yelling, loudly, at him the whole time, echoing off the nearby houses. I'm kind of just staring at this point as the adrenaline is coursing through me. At that moment, suddenly a little girl, maybe 3 to 4 years old, on a tricycle rides past me in the same direction as the man, and the smackhead, opposite direction that I was heading. She is just following her daddy, the man who saved me, like it's the most normal thing in the world. Most surreal thing that I've ever experienced. I just sort of watch as the three of them head back to the main street. I never got a chance to say thanks. I was the stranger once, in Toronto at the Yonge and Egg subway stop, mother and her 2 kids standing fairly back from the edge. Trains coming in pretty fast when one of the kids bolts straight for the tracks, like an idiot. My back's turned, but I hear the mum scream. I turn around and see the kid out of the corner of my eye. On instinct, I grab him and happen to just get him right in the front of the shirt and hoist him about 5 feet off the ground in half a second, just as the train flies by with the horn blaring. It was pure luck, but I played it cool and handed him over to his mother, trying to sound suave. "Is this yours?" Raised eyebrow. Funny thing that she didn't even seem that grateful. Maybe the kid has prophesied to end the world or something, in which case I'd like to apologize to you all in advance. I didn't know. There's lots of mysterious strangers in the last few posts. One wonders if any of them are the same superhero. I was drinking with a friend and his younger brother. My friend had recently finished his enlistment from the Marines, and we were out celebrating. His younger brother ended up having words with a gangster white rapper wannabe. It escalates into, "Let's take this outside." We go out into the parking lot, more words and chest puffing. Mini Eminem pulls out a gun and points it at my friend's younger brother. I'm like, crap, and my butthole tightens up. However, my friend walks up to the guy, slaps him in the face, and says, "Put the piece away, you dumb idiot, and go home." Guy puts the gun up and leaves. I was doing a show at this wretched comedy club in Brockton, Massachusetts. There was a drunk chick who would not stop talking, so after a few polite back and forths, I say something along the lines of, "Will someone stick an eggplant in her mouth and shut her up?" Note, this is an old, crappy thing to say, but it usually works, and like I said, it was Brockton. That does the trick and she's quiet for the rest of the show. I finish my set and come off stage. I'm walking out to the front room of the club and suddenly I'm aware of an enormous shape coming toward me. It was the hosebag's boyfriend and he's got like 8 inches and 100 pounds on me, and he's teed off. He shoves me into the front room and is doing a whole pre-fight, "Why you talking about my girl that way?" chest bump kind of thing when suddenly 3 dudes just kind of sweep into the room. They're all built like fire plugs and wearing matching skin-tight Adidas workout shirts like some kind of working-class superhero team. One of them closes the doors to the showroom and blocks them. Another goes and stands by the front door like he's standing guard or something, while the third gets between me and the big dude who says, "What the frick, man, you wanna fight?" And the guy says in the calmest, coldest voice, "Yeah, I do, let's fight." Something in the way he says it totally takes the steam out of the big dude. He just backs right down like, "Nah man, it's cool, we're all cool here." And then my mean little savior goes, "This guy was hilarious, your girlfriend's a C-word, and you owe him an apology and a beer." And the big guy nods and goes and gets me a beer, before going back into the show with his tail between his legs. Turns out these guys were off-duty Brockton Vice cops. Totally saved my stupid moron self. What's the worst case of psycho overprotective parenting that you've ever seen? When I was doing freshman orientation years ago at college, the tour guide told a story when we got to the dorms. The head RA for a freshman dorm got a knock on her office door about 2-ish months into the first semester, right before midterms. A girl walked in and asked what was the longest amount of time guests were allowed to stay in the room. The RA told her, can't remember the amount of days, and the girl says that her roommate's mother has been living in the room since the move-in weekend. Holy frick, no. I went to a high school with a guy whose parents had a camera installed in his room that fed into a TV screen in their bedroom. When he told me, I assumed it was one of those things they used when he was a baby, then disabled when he was older. Nope, according to him, they still kept it on 24/7, even though he was like 17 years old. I've never been so creeped out. Holy crap! I'd stare at the camera and pleasure myself furiously to assert dominance. Reddit has ruined me. My aunt won't let her kids open their own soda cans because she thinks they'll cut their fingers off, which was fine when they were young, but they're 15 and 18 now. When I attended private school, K-8, we weren't allowed to have soda cans. The reason was the principal had a student at her previous school get hit in the mouth with a kickball while drinking and sliced their lips. One freak, isolated accident, and no one's allowed soda cans. WTF. Sodas were allowed up until that witch came to school. It was a Catholic school, and that principal was your stereotypical nun who ran around the school with a bullhorn, yelling at students all day. A girl I know didn't get the talk from her parents until she was 18 or 19. Her mum had decided that if she didn't know what that was, she would keep her virginity forever or something like that.
Now, Sally, this is what people do when they really love each other. Oh, Billy and I do that all the time.
Girl at school wasn't allowed any sugar, no sweets, not even fruit. It was weird. I invited her to a party at mine, and her parents came round before the party to check our house was safe. They asked if our gate locked to keep people out. It wasn't fair on her, though. Every birthday or party, she'd eat tons of junk food and feel ill, and she used to crawl around the classroom pretending she was a cat. I think they broke her. Oof. I hope you recovered someday, young cat lady. I wonder if she was diabetic or something, or if the parents were just straight-up Fruit Loops. My wife's mother. Too many acts of lunacy to mention, but the one that sticks out was when we went to their house for the family barbecue. We were in our mid-20s. Mum decides to start a fight over my presence, as I wasn't family, and thus should not be attending. Wife says, if he's not welcome, we're leaving. Mum says, no you're not, you're grounded. Wife just gives her this tilt-your-head sideways look and says, we're going back to our house. I know someone who has just moved into her college dorm a couple of weeks ago. This girl has never had a house key as her mum wouldn't allow it. If she wanted in the house, mum better be there. Her parents also have all of her social media passwords, and her mum openly states she used to go and read the chat conversations. Not as bad as others, however the girl has already been home one weekend and is set to come back in a few weeks. We're all wondering how she'll rebel once she's under the college experience. This girl's brother, who's in middle school, maybe just starting high school, is worse. He is so coddled that he freaks out when he was left in a waiting room at a doctor's office alone, while his uncle went back for his appointment. The kid could not be left alone. For the record, neither kid is special needs. Around the middle of my first semester of college, I lost my phone. I noticed it was missing around when I got back to my dorm. Thinking that I left it in one of my classrooms, I called for it from a friend's phone. A classmate who lives off campus had found it. He took it home because he knew it was mine and was going to give it back next Monday during class. And that was that. I would get my phone on Monday, so problem solved. Boy, was I wrong. Because he turned off the phone after that call, my mother couldn't get a hold of me. My mum, being my mum, assumed I was dead in a smack house after doing too many substances. The lunatic took a plane and flew from Panama to DC just so she could check I was doing okay. Halfway across the continent just so she could ask one question. Keep in mind my best friend and 4 other high school friends were attending the same college as me and lived in the same dorm building as me, and she had all their phone numbers. Also, to make matters worse, this was not the last time she took an 8-hour flight just to make sure I was okay. My first roommate in college was extremely coddled by his mother, or at least I thought so. His home was about an hour away from campus, and she came up every day to get his laundry and make his bed, clean his side of the room. They were both neat freaks, and I wasn't a slob by any means, but I wasn't quite as neat as either of them would have liked. What ended up happening is I would come back from my class and find her making my bed, organizing my desk, and picking up my dirty clothes. Didn't really appreciate that, but I didn't want to make waves, so I just kept my mouth closed. Finally, it got really weird when I came back after a class had gotten cancelled and they were both in the same twin bed. He was sleeping and she was stroking his hair and face and singing him a lullaby. Wife grew up in a quiverful family. She was only allowed to wear ankle-length skirts, no movies at any time, only parental-approved books. Pilgrim's Progress, the Bible, theology books, no music except for classical and hymns. In order to date her, I had to court her. That involved never being alone, her parents inviting themselves to our anniversary dinners, siblings repeating every word that we said back to her parents. I gave her a goodbye hug and her mother yelled at her, calling her a whore and a loose woman. Finally, she gave up and ran away. They chased her to her car screaming and tried to block her in the driveway with a tractor. My first boyfriend in high school practically lived at our house because my mother refused to let me go to his. He was over every day after school and most weekends. Finally, I convinced her to let me drive myself to his house. At this point, I had met his dad twice, and his dad thought he did something to offend or scare me off because I never came to visit them. I really wanted to go out and hang out with him and his dad, so I drove myself to his house with the condition that I call my mother immediately upon arrival from their phone. Google Maps said it should take 8 minutes to get there. 8 minutes and 45 seconds later, I get an enraged phone call from my mum. I was just walking in the door and I hadn't called her yet. She made me immediately return home and grounded me from my cell phone for a month. The parents from these stories are the kind of people who go on murderous rampages when their children inevitably rebel, aren't they? I had an ex-boyfriend from high school whose parents were very strict about him dating. So we always had group dates, we weren't allowed to be alone, we went over to his house for a movie night and everyone all of a sudden left. But it was super late and my dad's place was across town. So I called for him to pick me up, but it was going to take 45 minutes to get there. His parents made me wait outside on the porch alone in November in Canada. It was cold. He wasn't allowed to wait outside with me. They didn't even let me wait in the foyer with them supervising. Well, girls who've frozen to death can't get pregnant, I guess. My mother signed me out of high school, and I was not allowed to go out of the house for almost 2 years. She quit her job and was convinced the Asian mafia was going to kill us. I wasn't allowed near windows, to get the mail, nothing. But my siblings came and went as they pleased. To this day, I do not understand. You were obviously the favorite. Congrats! I got one. My sister once told me about this one time when she was at a beach house with her friends. They were all over 20 years old and they were planning to stay there the weekend. Obviously, they were going to stay up all night watching movies when midnight strikes. This one girl's phone starts to ring and it was her mother telling her to go to sleep. Worst part? She silently stood up and went to bed. She's over 20 years old. I had a 9 p.m. bedtime at 17. I had to get up at 8 a.m. the next day, so for 11 hours a day I was supposed to be in bed asleep. It drove me nuts. Getting up early was also a big no-no because I woke her up. I wasn't allowed to leave my room for anything either. It was hell. It took months of her screaming at me and me talking as calmly as I could while she hit, screamed, trashed my room and my schoolwork before she would let me stay up as long as I wanted. The school ended up getting involved because I went from an A student to a D in a matter of months because I just couldn't get all of my work done. I worked on the weekends and was training 4 nights a week as well. Made getting all my work done difficult when after school I was supposed to clean the house, eat dinner, then go straight to training. I work security at a college, so I've seen my fair share. This wasn't so much overprotective as it was babying. I once had a mother call our office. The exchange went as following. Mother.
Hello? Can you please tell my son's professor that he won't be in class today? He doesn't feel well.
Me. Where is your son?
Oh, he's there, on campus, in the dorms.
Ma'am, I don't know who your son's professor is, and even if I did, it's his responsibility to get in touch with them, not mine or yours.
Oh, I know, but he called me and asked me to call him out of class.
He's in college now. He's 18, he can do this on his own. He doesn't even need to call, he emails his professor.
Oh, you're so right.
I had a friend growing up whose mum refused to send a Christmas card with her and her brother's photos on it. The mum was convinced at the end of the season, once people threw away the cards, the garbage man or anyone rifling through the trash would see her amazing, beautiful children, find the address on the discarded envelope, and come kidnap the kids from their home. She did many other bizarre things, but that one always stuck out to me.
I frickin' hate when parents do this. It's extremely overprotective and kids need to be exposed to the world. Besides, I tend to return the kids when I'm done with them. Sincerely, the garbage man.
In all seriousness, the level of paranoia to imagine that people are digging through your trash specifically to get the rare thrown-out photos of children who sent the card from a different house is an extreme level of delusion. On my friend's 13th birthday, his big brother was taking us paintballing. We said goodbye to his mum. She was, in full disclosure, a severe paranoid schizophrenic who liked to go off her meds. Anywho, we left the house and headed to paintball. At a random gas station a good half-hour away, we stopped for snacks. When the older brother goes inside, the mum pulls up to a screeching halt next to us, rolls down the windows and starts yelling at us to make sure the older brother spends all the money on paintball, rocking the crazy eyes the whole time. She leaves by rolling around to the back of the gas station and idling there. When the older brother got back, we told him what was going on. He told us to buckle up. Sure enough, we pulled out of the gas station and she starts to try tailing us. I say try because next thing I know we're on the freeway doing at least 100, dodging from lane to lane till we found a quick off-ramp that took us under a bridge where we hid for a few minutes to make sure we'd lost her.
The older brother refused to let her ruin my friend's 13th birthday. He was a good dude. There's two major things that we older brothers have to do. 1. Annoy your siblings. 2. Make sure no one else F's with your siblings. My ex's mum screamed in my face, legit inches away from my face, that I was stealing her son away when he bought his house. It was his decision to buy a house and he had wanted me to live with him. The location of the house, you ask? Directly across the street from where his parents live. Was his name Raymond, and did everybody love him? My former roommate's parents were extremely protective of them. Once I woke up to 3 calls and 4 texts from her mum asking if my roommate was in the room. I replied back, yes. Later that day, my roommate explained to me that there was a girl murdered in North Carolina that fit her description and her parents wanted to make sure she was alive. We go to school over 400 miles away from North Carolina. I don't know about the worst, since my parents were pretty good about other stuff, but anything to do with adult fun times was a major no-go. I remember them trying to give the talk to my oldest sister, who was about 8 or 9 at the time, making me 4 or 5. We got to the part where the guy puts the thing he pees out of into a hole that I was not aware existed, and I ran away screaming. That subject was never revisited. They pulled me out of middle school adult education because it was too early and my high school taught abstinence. I thought that all adult flicks, not just those ones starring children, were illegal until college. My friend's mum. They're great people and I love them like a second family, but she was overprotective. 4th grade, his mum cut the tail off the Nightcrawler action figure I got him for his birthday for being demonic. 5th grade, she throws away the medieval Spawn action figure I got him for being Spawn. High school, she throws away the vintage Faster Pussycat shirt I gave him. His dad's cool though. He'd watch Beavis and Butthead with us when we were 10. I once dated a girl with absolutely insane parents. Throughout middle school and high school, they refused to let her go out to anything but school and choir trips. She had to argue and bargain with them for months just to be able to go to senior prom. They wouldn't let her go to junior prom. They also refused to let her get a driver's license or a car to limit her mobility. Even to this day, they refuse to let her go out. She, a 20-year-old woman, has to get permission from her super restrictive mum and dad to go out for coffee at the cafe downstairs. The worst part of it all is that she can't move out as they have hold of her passport and where she lives. It's more or less impossible to get anything done without it. On the legality of withholding her passport, I don't know for sure whether it is or not. The laws where I lived sometimes had really backwards policies. I've advised her to try to take action or escape many times, but for personal reasons, she's decided not to. I disagree entirely with her choice, but it's her choice to make, not mine. I graduated high school a year and a few months ago. A good friend of mine was a freshman in my senior year. Now she's a junior and taking college classes at my college. She's not allowed to talk to me because I graduated. She still does in person, but not as much as we used to be able to. There are a lot more stories of these sorts of relationships continuing into adulthood than I would have expected. How about you? When I was in college, I was dating a girl and had been for some time. My dad lived in another state and we had made plans to go visit him, so she could meet him for the first time. The day we were supposed to leave, like 2 hours before we left town, she got her grades from her college. They weren't as good as her parents wanted, so they grounded her. I went to her house to try and reason with her mum. I should have bailed at that red flag, but I was in love, and her mum was so condescending. I explained how my dad and stepmom had made arrangements for her to be there, and how excited they were to meet her. She wouldn't hear it. I made the mistake of saying, I understand that you're upset, but deciding this right before the trip just seems childish. I was banned from their house. We were actually together for a really long time after that, but I know they're still really overprotective and she's really dependent on them. She's 31 and the last time I talked to her, a few months back, she still lived with them. My boss has a baby and a 4-year-old and they are super overprotective. Like the 4-year-old still sleeps in their bed with them and the baby, and they haven't left either kid alone with another person ever. Sometimes he talks about how they've never been out since the kids. Like I can relate. I have a pair myself, but we still live our lives. The 4-year-old went to preschool, so the mum went with him and sat in the class every day, and even sat at his table and played with him instead of letting him interact with his peers. One time they were in the office and my boss hand-fed him food because he didn't want the kid handling the food himself since the kid had recently touched their computer. Recently he was describing their garden and how the food at the back never gets picked because we can't go back there ever because of the baby, you know?
No, I have no idea. You lived on a small fenced lot in the suburbs. What are you afraid of getting to your baby if you walk out to the corner of your yard? The worst part is he's constantly telling me how tired he is and how his kids never sleep. But it's probably because they're all sleeping in the same bed, waking each other up all the time. Both my kids were in their own room by a couple of months old, and it made life so much easier. When they're in the room with you, you notice every little noise. I was TAing a general chemistry lab in college, and a parent emailed me after the first lab report with an annotated copy of the graded assignment I gave, which was a B+. Little Johnny had never gotten a B in class before, and I was being unfair since it was his first semester in college. Long story short, she threatened to go to the professor. I said go ahead, and they did. The professor was awesome. When kids whine and moan about their grades, he offers them a regrade, and then goes over the report with a fine-toothed comb. The B+ got changed to a C. The student was the one who ultimately asked for the regrade. Would he have asked for one if his parents didn't make a stink? Maybe, maybe not. It doesn't matter. Part of being in college is learning to take responsibility for your actions. And there's a reason professors rely on TAs for grading freshman lab assignments. Their time and attention is better spent elsewhere. Asking the professor for a personal regrade must carry downside risk. Otherwise, everyone would ask for one every time. Please feel free to question the grader on anything. That's part of their job too. Just make sure you have a solid case before requesting a formal regrade. A friend of mine had a very overprotective and religious set of parents. He didn't have a door on his bedroom or bathroom. When you went over there, you had to take your shoes and socks off. I understand shoes, but how are socks any more dirty than bare feet? He never got dropped anywhere either. Always had to be mum or dad there. I think the scariest part of that to me and some of the other commenters was the lack of a door on a bathroom. Seriously, WTF? Yes, I've been waiting for this. So I met my wife on OkCupid. We were about 21 at the time. I came into her life at a very bad moment. She was failing classes, anxiety-prone, etc. Eventually, she got asked to take a leave of absence from her school. Against my better advice, she didn't tell her parents. Went back to the school to pack up her stuff and figure out what her next move was. Well, her parents found out within that next day or so, and her dad flew some odd 1,000 miles to get her and go back home. But this was the next thing. They cut her off from the world. She couldn't go outside the house unless it was to the schools that they enrolled her in to get her back in good standing. She dropped off the face of the earth. Her mum spent time writing all of her friends, pretending to be her, stating that they could not be friends and that she was just moving on with her life. Her mum did the same to me. Eventually I got a hold of her and we had to talk secret for months on end. We started dating and she graduated and we kept talking. Well, she finally moves out of her parents' house and comes to visit me some 1,000 miles away. Her parents cut her cell phone off. When she gets back to her hometown, they demand she comes over. They confiscate some items of hers that I gave her and told her to never speak to me again. That doesn't work, of course. Eventually we say screw it because they're bat crap crazy. We're talking the mother mailing me that she knew who many managers were and she could call them and let them have some fricking craziness. And then we got married. When we finally tell them, which is like a month or two after it happens, the mum played the victim like we didn't even get her the chance to get to know me and to like me. And I'm just like, B-word! You impersonated your daughter and told me that you wanted nothing to do with me. Your daughter told you that we would be together, and you threatened to disown her. As you could see, this completely works me up. Nonetheless, now the mother refuses to speak with either of us, has manipulated the ballless father into not speaking with his own child, and the teenaged younger sister thinks that my wife is the world's most awful person for choosing to live her life. For frick's sake. Educators, have you ever had a real genius in class? What made him or her so smart? When I was student teaching, I had a work-study gig at a wraparound program in my city. It was half tutoring, half daycare for students that needed a place to go between that time when school ended but before their parents got home. While it was mostly populated by middle and high school students, there were a handful of very young children as well, 5 to 6 years old. One very little girl, she couldn't have been older than 6, was probably 5, approached me with a box of chess. She didn't know how to play, but said her father played and she wanted to learn how. I'm not a chess expert, but I've played a good amount of times and read a few books, and I can beat my friends or a hard computer. To clarify that, I'm talking about the hard setting on my phone. It's about 1500 ELO. I'm somewhere above that, but probably not by much. I met with this little girl for about 30 minutes every day. In 2 days, she understood all the rules and could play competently. At the end of the week, she tied the game in a stalemate. At the end of the second week, I never won again. Turns out she was the daughter of a professor at my college, and he was an internationally ranked chess player. When I ran into him, he couldn't thank me enough for teaching his daughter chess, as his wife had issued a decree that he wasn't allowed to teach or play or mention chess around their daughter. Understandable, didn't want to pressure her or discourage her. Chess was in these people's genes, man. I teach a university-level writing course for people who typically aren't in writing-heavy majors, math, science, etc. It's hard to make a 100 in a writing course for anyone, because even great writers do something wrong in papers sometimes. A missing citation, argument could be more nuanced, rush through conclusion, etc. All mistakes that will at least take you from a 100 to a 98 or something. This kid made a stone-cold 100 on every paper. Like, I literally couldn't find anything wrong in any of them. That is bizarre for even great writers. I've never felt more worthless as a teacher because there was just nothing I could suggest to improve unless I started making stuff up. I found out later that he had a 100 in all of his classes that semester, including some really difficult upper-level STEM ones. I don't know if he was a genius, but he's probably the closest I've had, and I wonder if having a 99 average would feel like a disappointment to him. My ex taught primary school, and she gave her class a weekly spelling test and said anyone who bettered their score from last week would receive a chocolate. Most kids got 15 or above out of 20, except for one kid who got 0. She said all the other kids had made fun of him, as kids would, but he was strangely calm about it. Didn't get stressed from the teasing, as most kids would. Next test, he got 1. Same ordeal, but received a chocolate as per the rules. Next week 2, then 3, then 4, receiving a chocolate each week. I didn't fathom a 10-year-old kid could conduct something so cunning. This was an odd 15 years ago, wouldn't be surprised if he was super successful now. Smart kid, but I'm not sure that the right lesson was being taught to him. I have taught at university level for decades and have certainly come across some very smart kids. High success most often correlates with an element of obsession and work ethic. There are, however, 2 students out of the 10,000 plus I have taught who stand out. Student 1 was deeply obsessed with his area of study and just about anything else. He rarely went to the lectures he had signed up for and could be found sitting in the back of classes of every subject you could imagine. He was a socially very engaged person whose enthusiasm was exhausting. His final GPA was very mediocre, a fact that did not bother him in the slightest. He had no interest in the minutiae of undergraduate study. He was working at a PhD level and beyond in his final undergraduate year, sucking every bit of information out of his professors. He ultimately became a high-tech multimillionaire. Student number 2 may be what you're looking for and is the only example I've encountered. This was a very shy and humble young man who took a long time to get to know, but was very engaging once you did. He came from a working-class family with no history of higher education and worked long hours at McDonald's. The first thing I noticed was the truly extraordinary quality of his work, effortlessly solving problems that previous students had not even come close to solving. His ability to pick up complex ideas and even extend them was unrivaled. Other professors reported the same. Pressures of work and many other problems resulted in him not turning up to class often, but he would still ace the course. In his final term, he did not attend a single class of any subject. He simply turned up for the final exam and midterm. He won the undergraduate gold medal for the university. He sadly now is socially dysfunctional, unemployed, and has been in trouble with the law. I always felt the system did not serve him well. I'm not sure about genius, but I'm currently teaching a very bright student in a class that is supposedly remedial. His home life is horrible and his behavior presents a serious challenge. But he can skim my notes before a lesson and completely understand it. To keep him engaged, I will sometimes ask him to help me explain a concept, and he can do it just as well, if not sometimes better than I can. He's gotten a 100% on every test and quiz that we've had this year. I asked the principal why the student is in the class that he's in, and he said that administrators won't put him in advanced classes because his behavior is distracting others. I've recommended this student for advanced classes next year, and I have an assistant principal on my side now. We're working with him on his behavior, which has shown improvement, especially in the past few weeks. High school history teacher here. The genius student I had didn't open the textbook once, took very little notes, came to review sessions, yet sat attentively and answered every question I asked aloud correctly. Showed up to all my tests with just a pencil and would be first to finish nearly every time. Only question he ever got wrong was a bonus one in my first month of teaching that asked the students to correctly spell my last name, as the majority never call me anything but Miss. Fantastic all-round kid too. Athlete, in the musicals, social, loved by all. Got into every college he applied for. Michael was 7 when I met him, and what set him apart was his ability to direct his own learning, his well-rounded intelligence, and his genuine love of learning. He was in my 3rd grade class, and it was clear right away that he was smart, could do any math we gave him, spell anything, reading on a higher level than we tested for. And I teach in a town that's pretty pretentious about its kids. Very high socioeconomic level, tons of kids go to Ivy Leagues, many parents think their kid is a genius. Michael's mum knew he was smart, but didn't seem to get how smart. But he was never the kind to show off or want to impress people. He loved learning and was so excited to share it with everyone. Some noteworthy things he did: taught himself about the stock market. His mum wouldn't let him invest money, so he invested theoretical amounts and then showed her what it would have earned. Came in with an autobiography of George Bush to read during the silent reading. Not a kid version, the official biography. He was able to tell me about it and commented that he disagrees with Bush politically, but felt bad for him because he thought he was pushed into politics by wanting to live up to his dad, but wasn't happy in it. Noticed some languages have similarities, so started mapping out how he thought they were related. This was in 2nd grade. In 3rd grade, he showed me his map and I told him about language family trees, and he was so excited. He got really into language isolates and wanted to learn Basque. Related to this, he made himself flashcards of Greek and Latin roots to help his spelling and vocabulary. Taught himself hexadecimal and binary and was working on other computer languages. He was incredibly socially intuitive and empathetic. He would say to me, "I think so-and-so is upset," and the kid in question would be fine. Inevitably, before the day ended, that kid would have a meltdown or ask to talk to me about an issue. I learned fast to trust Michael's judgment. This also made him a really great friend. He did it with me too. He'd ask if I was okay, and I'd be having a really rough day. It was so strange but sweet to have this tiny kid say things like, "Let me know what I can do to support you today." Oh, and I've thought of another. He was also musically very gifted, taught himself some instruments, and could identify pretty obscure musical pieces by ear. He moved at the end of the year and I lost touch. It was so great getting to be his teacher. It's cheesy, but I learned so much about how to teach and support gifted students by working with him. As someone who basically speaks 1.5 languages despite working in both for many years, I'm incredibly envious of just this kid's talent for picking languages up. Wow. I'm a former teacher. Geniuses just know things. There's not much you can teach them in today's schools because they're so far ahead of the rest of the class that you can't teach them and the rest of the students at the same time. I had a student who reads books in class. If I asked her to explain what I had just said, she explained it perfectly without looking up from the book. Some students complained about her making A's while reading books in class while they listened and didn't make A's. I couldn't help that. She was bored in class. I could waste classes' time scolding her, or I could leave her alone. I teach French, and I think I currently have one in my French 4 class. This kid is insane. Knows stuff that I've never explicitly taught, demonstrated on in-class assessments, so no Google Translate happening here. She's also not the cheating kind of kid. She masters difficult grammatical concepts without even needing to practice them. All I have to say is, this is how and why you use the subjunctive, and she gets it. Perfectly. Every time. In speech, in writing, everything she does is meticulous, well thought out, and above and beyond what I ask for. And she's like this in every class. I have good students in my school, really good students, affluent district, but this girl absolutely takes the cake. Helps teach a student at another high school who is an extremely talented arts student. This kid has the ability to take something from concept to in front of you, in reality, in less than a few hours. He helped design and build an entire set for a play we did on a ridiculously small budget. What made him so smart is his ability to think through all of the logical steps of the process immediately. He figured out the potential problems before they happened and took steps to avoid them from the planning stages. To me, this is what makes someone an actual genius. The ability to understand and work through a problem quickly and effortlessly that most others struggle with. It is absolutely incredible just how wide the gap is between the lowest performer and the highest performer in a single classroom. I teach AP Physics among other things, and one of my students got finished with his work in 1/4 of the time through the class and gave everyone at his table the answers just so he could talk with his friends about the particularly relative nature of mathematics. It was fantastic to see. At a table right next to his, I had a student ask me, "Why does NASA need money to build things if they're so important to build? Shouldn't they just build them?" Please support tracked learning. I think this kid just solved our national debt issue. We don't need to pay anyone. If the work is important, they'll do it. Not a genius per se, but I've had a few very gifted kids in my classes. Sometimes they're just naturally gifted or their parents push them or support them outside of school. Some want to learn as many new skills as possible and absorb all the information you give them. They can be left to work on something as long as it interests them. Others know they're capable of doing very well, but they don't care and slack off a bit because they know they can. It's very difficult to motivate these students sometimes. Sometimes they get bored by the work or don't want to write the reports that go with it. This can sometimes be a problem because most pieces of coursework require certain things which must be in it to receive a good grade, and they question the need for it. One very, very gifted girl I taught was an absolute pleasure to have in class. I remember doing a couple of things on the Nepal earthquakes when they happened last year. I was a geography teacher, and she wrote an absolutely outstanding essay on the impacts and everything, comparing it to some other examples, things like that. I think what really helped her to do so well was the fact that her parents were very, very supportive and nice people, also intelligent, and they kept just enough pressure on her to do well without being helicopter parents. She had a really positive attitude to school and academia in general and could see the value of everything she learned. I spoke to her English teacher after getting this incredible essay, and she said she was writing at a similar level then. By the way, she was 11 and writing at the sort of level and detail I'd expect from my 17 to 18-year-olds. Apparently she read a lot of books and was always just interested. Brilliant stuff. I actually learnt stuff from her on occasion, which was amazing and always made me smile. Anyway, I showed this essay to a member of senior management who thought after seeing it was plagiarism, but she wrote it there in front of me. I miss teaching when I think back to pupils like her. I think the most interesting kid I ever taught was during my teaching practice. He was a 14-year-old kid called David, not especially interested in school, preferring to be outside messing with his mates or playing football, but he had the most interesting style of writing I've ever come across. So articulate and mature, yet with a quirky, humorous edge to it that showed a real independence of thought. I loved reading his work. It's been 10 years since I taught him, and I've yet to come across another pupil of his quality. I only taught him for a few months before I moved to a different placement, but I did take him aside before I left to tell him that I thought he had a real talent he could pursue. There was something innate with him, a real natural flair and talent. Others have achieved great success through pure hard work and determination, but I wouldn't class them as geniuses. I think I'm going to echo the sentiment of many of the other commenters that I read while getting through these stories now. This is a slightly demoralizing read to some of us who didn't come out of the womb with a brain firing on all cylinders with talent in all subjects. Oh well. I don't know if I would say that she was a genius, but there is one student I always think about. This was at a school that is known for having some of the smartest students around, at least in the on-paper sense, that they had great grades and test scores. And this was a class that attracted a lot of the highest achievers, read pre-med requirement. She had the highest average for all of the regular graded work, labs, problem sets, exams, but there's only so far you can stand apart from the others with those, particularly at a school like that. What allowed me to be completely blown away by her was her research papers. This was one of those core courses that had multiple professors, so he had to standardize the material, and there was a standard rubric for how the students were supposed to write the research papers. What essential questions they should be answering along the way, how to do the primary literature research, and how to cite your sources. The papers I got almost always fell into one of two categories: the C or below papers and the A papers. The C papers were from the students who, for some reason, didn't really get it with the rubric and still wrote it like it was a high school paper where they were obviously just rewording what they read on Wikipedia, plus some light cut-and-paste plagiarism from the abstracts of papers they clearly never read, and not enough citations. The A papers were from students who simply followed the rubric to the letter. They answered every question in the paper consecutively as it was written in the rubric, cited their sources, always reading and using just enough papers to be sufficient and no more, with the occasional sprinkling of the subtle cut-and-paste plagiarism. These papers were usually dull as crap, but often never had so much as a typo, so I pretty much had to give them an A because they did what I asked them to do. I never liked including the research papers in this course because the students were clearly not mature enough to really tackle the material in a productive way. They were fine freshman papers, but a waste of everyone's time in the end. Then, one day, I had this student in my class. She never followed the rubric and its dopey questions at all. She thought of her own questions for the topic, the ones that were the most interesting and relevant to that topic specifically. Many of these questions were truly insightful and open-ended as well. She went into the literature and really read and clearly understood these papers that should have been way over the head of any normal teenager college student. Then, on top of that, she would obtain the data from these papers and run her own different analyses using very complex methodologies that I didn't teach until the most advanced courses for seniors and graduate students. So she was clearly just teaching herself as she went along. Lastly, she was a terrific writer, maybe one of the best I've ever read. Her papers always came in way too long for the limit. Normally a sign the paper was an editing nightmare, and I loved reading them. She knew how long the paper needed to be to cover the topic, and my limits were just suggestions she chose to ignore, and rightfully so. She is the type of student I think should get an A, not the other I dotters and T crosses, but alas, in the world of grade inflation, about 25% of my students always got A's. I've had a lot of really smart students, but never had another one like her. I love students like that. I teach an honors class, and the kids are so set on following a rubric to the letter that I love to set them up with an intentionally vague assignment in order to spur creativity. For example, to demonstrate that they understand the thematic elements of the literary movement for transcendentalism, I gave them the assignment, represent transcendentalism in another medium. So I actually got projects like a stop-motion video, a fake Tumblr, a children's book, a memory box, paintings, photography, etc. Honors kids tend to get the concepts quicker, but show reluctance if not given explicit instructions. I force them to be more interpretive. I had a student last fall in an Introduction to American Politics course, who was a computer science major taking the course as an elective. This kid absorbed information like a sponge and performed better on exams and essays than any of the political science majors. He would often drop by my office just to chat about politics and statistical programming. He eventually stopped coming to classes many days because I had to dumb down all the material so much for the other students. He still passed with flying colors and had a higher average than anyone else in the class, and eventually started a double major in political science and computer science. Students like that make the job worth the effort. My point here was that not only one single student makes the job worth the while, actually teaching is only 1/3 of my job, in addition to helping advise students and conducting my own research. I devote my position as a professor to all of my students individually, if they're willing to accept that attention. Many students refuse to come to class, complete assignments, study for exams, or show up at all during office hours. This is unfortunate for those students, and if I just described you, then you need to get off Reddit and read a fricking book. The truth is, I love my job very much. If I didn't, I would quit. Simple as that. I came for the story of a genius. I stayed for the repressed, salty rant of a college professor. Fun to get insight into the mind of one of our higher education authority figures. I did, however, it's a bit of a sad story. I worked at a special school for you people labeled as emotionally disturbed. One of my students would finish assignments in under 10 minutes. I would try to differentiate for him, but I'll be honest that I was a new teacher and not very good at it, combined with the fact that I was teaching 5 subjects and dealing with a variety of classroom challenges. Logically, his response was, "Why do I have to do more work just because I'm smart?" He had a fair point, and I couldn't see me forcing him to complete work that probably didn't challenge him anyway. So I let him play RuneScape. Now before you get pitchforks out, let me explain my logic. I, a bit of a nerd myself, understood the mental exercise of contemplating the most efficient or effective means of doing something in a video game, and although I never played RuneScape, figured it offered him an outlet to do something similar. Unfortunately, being a genius isn't all fun and games. Intellectual theorists say the further your IQ is from the norm of 100, the harder time you have relating to the masses. As I mentioned before, I was at a special school. This young man struggled with peer relations and had a crippling anxiety that often manifested in self-harm. He would beat his head on his desk, punch himself, slam his face into the corner of metal filing cabinets, etc. If we were lucky, he would just crawl under a desk and cry and cry. My heart went out to him, as I know sometimes thinking of my future and the world around me can turn into a grim task. I can only imagine how it looked to a young boy placed in a special ed setting when his mind was left to wander. I know my colleagues may disagree, but I still feel RuneScape was therapy. I've had some smart kids, so smart that others think they're a genius, but for me, they're just really clever. That being said, there was this one kid. Not that bright, but he did this one thing that had genius written all over it. I sat there talking him through some trig. Got to the point where it was something like tan 65 and I thought, damn, I forgot to grab a calculator. What did he do? He told me it to the nearest whole number. I was shocked and thought it was a fluke. I gave him another and guess what? He got that right too. He wasn't the brightest kid, but he knew his trig ratios. A kid in Standard Algebra 2 who never did a lick of homework but made hundreds on every test. I talked to him and he said he didn't see the point in wasting his time in homework when he already knew how to do the problems. A month or two into the year, I told him I'd just make his test average his grade. I also had a talk with him to say that sometimes in life, you can cut to the chase when you know your stuff, but sometimes you still have to jump through hoops that seem stupid, even when you don't see the point, and even when there might not be a point. To those saying that's a bad thing to say to an intelligent kid, try starting a business or patenting your game-changing invention without getting the proper government permits, etc. That even though I'm giving him a break, sometimes you have to do your homework, even when it seems unnecessary. As an aside, I later taught information technology, and I told the kids that if they earned their industry certification at the end of the year, A+ or Microsoft Technology Associate, depending on grade level, I'd change their grades so they got an A for the year. Because earning the certification proves mastery of the concepts I was teaching. Had a 70 to 80% pass rate, and I really think this policy had something to do with that. It motivated the kids to work hard, and I almost never had to change a grade. Cops. Are there any crimes that you intentionally don't enforce? Just before Thanksgiving, my dad called me and informed me that I had failed to pay a parking ticket and that my license had been suspended. Concerned that I would get pulled over and ticketed, I decided to pay the ticket right there and then on my phone. Since I couldn't print the confirmation screen out, I just took a picture of the screen with my phone so I could prove that I had paid the ticket in the unlikely event that I got pulled over. Well, lo and behold, as I'm driving home for Thanksgiving the next day, I get pulled over by a state trooper. He immediately recognizes that my license was suspended and starts explaining that I was driving illegally and so on and so forth. Before he can lecture me too long, I whip out my phone, scroll to the picture of the ticket payment confirmation screen, and hand him the phone. As soon as he grabbed the phone, he sort of furrowed his brow and in a completely teed-off tone he goes, "What the hell is this?" I'm about to calmly explain the situation to him when suddenly he tilts the screen towards me and I'm staring directly at a picture of my eggplant. My freaking heart stopped beating and I could feel all the blood in my body rushing to my face. I had accidentally flipped one picture too far to an eggplant pic I took for some ex-girlfriend when I was hammered, and I had then handed the phone to the cop. Time basically stopped as I was sure he was going to arrest me for some kind of harassment crime and put me on a watch list for life. Mortified, I shakily scrolled back to the payment confirmation pic and handed the phone back to him. He reluctantly looked at the screen, nodded, and then let out a little laugh. As he tossed my phone back to me, he said, "Have a nice Thanksgiving," and walked back to his car shaking his head. I drove home in complete silence and deleted any and all eggplant pics the moment I pulled into my parents' driveway. I am forever in that dude's debt for just laughing it off instead of throwing me in prison. In conclusion, I accidentally showed a picture of my member to a state trooper and he didn't smash my face in with a baton. I will try my best not to arrest a parent in front of a small child. With a misdemeanor, you have quite a bit of officer discretion, but I've gone so far as to wait for an hour or so until a family member can pick up the kid before I handcuff the parent. It just really bothers me. I want kids to trust police officers if they ever need help, not be afraid of them. That's a good level of compassion there. Have to arrest you, but wait until mum comes to fetch the kid so the kid doesn't have a scarring memory of daddy. Driving between St. Louis, Missouri and Dayton, Ohio, I got pulled over around midnight by a cop on the freeway. I was confused a bit since I hadn't been speeding, but my car had California plates, as that's the state where I lived at the time, and I thought, well, maybe I have a tail light out or something. First thing he says when he sees my license and registration, "California, huh? Got a lot of pot in the car?" Because I'm a moron and I was tired, my answer was, "Define a lot." He did not find it funny. Luckily, his partner did. The guy with my license and registration, a younger white guy, kept his stone-cold face and said, "Step out of the car, please," while the older black cop just tried to keep from laughing out loud. "Hands on the hood, feet apart," he says, and he starts to pat me down. "Mind if you tell me what you're looking for?" I ask. "Do you have anything in your pockets that'll harm me? Needles or something?" "I have a Swiss Army knife in my right pocket, but it's all closed up," I say. "How do I know that?" he asks accusingly. Again, I turn into Captain Moron. Because I wouldn't keep a naked 3-inch blade only a couple of inches from my member while driving across the country. This time the older cop does laugh out loud and the younger guy looks flustered. He tells me slowly to turn around with hands above my shoulders, then he backs up 4 steps and says to use my left hand to empty my pockets onto the hood of the car. The older cop just sighs and says, "Hold on a sec, don't move," and pulls the younger guy to the back of the cop car where they have a very private and brief conversation. The younger one gets into the car and gets on the radio, while the older one comes up to me and says, "Look, you know why we pulled you over? Because you were swerving in the lane a bit. Thought you might be drunk. How long have you been driving?" "About 5 hours. I left St. Louis around 7, hoping to make it to Dayton." "You been drinking?" "Diet Coke and Gatorade mostly. No alcohol or anything." "You need some sleep, son. Dayton's still about 45 minutes away. Think you can make it?" To be honest, I was kind of tired, but I think you guys just scared me awake. He smiles. "Alright, hang tight a sec," and walks back to the car. He comes back. "You have 2 bench warrants in California, and there's an APB out in the car as stolen after an armed robbery." "What?" I say. "That doesn't make any sense. I never did anything." I'm panicking now. I'm freaking out. In a second, my night just went from boring to awful. "Actually, just messing with you. You're free to go. Hopefully that adrenaline will keep you awake for an hour," he says. I laugh and say, "Jesus frickin' Christ, that is effed up, man." He just smiles and says, "Take care, stay on the road." I got to Dayton around 1 a.m. and couldn't fall asleep until 3. That dude knew his crap. Well, I'm not a cop, but this happened to me during my substance using days. This was years and years ago, and I'm proud to be clean now. I was driving to work when a cop recognized me and knew I was driving with a suspended license. He searched my car before he arrested me. As we were pulling up to the jail, he held up a bag of needles he found under my seat. He said, "If you promise to quit this, I'll throw these away before we pull into the station." My mom bailed me out a few hours later and took me straight to rehab. That cop was awesome. He saved me from being in big-time trouble, and likely saved my life by scaring me into rehab. You have no idea how often us cops try to do this. If we know someone is a frequent flyer, and we recognize what the underlying problem is, we will go out of our way to solve that problem rather than just making the arrest. Because I know if I can solve this person's addiction, illness, or apathy, then I won't have to continue to take dispatched runs there. I've got junkies and drunks into rehab. I've paid for a young working girl's bus ticket home to Chicago so she could be with her family and her support system. She was in a city all by herself, and her pimp had her so strung out she couldn't tell you what day of the week it was. If I know someone is religious, or their family is religious, I'll use that as leverage to try and get people into rehab. Arresting someone, as said before, is just a tool used to temporarily solve the problem. It's a band-aid, not a cure. By the way, by my estimates, I'd say that 70 to 75% of all domestic-related run-ins have an addiction element in them, substances or booze. 95% of homeless that I've dealt with are addicts themselves, and I'd say 65% have mental health issues. My first run-in with the law at 17. I was driving on a 3-lane highway at rush hour going 85 in the far left lane while tailgating a big SUV. A van parked in the left shoulder suddenly came into view. I had drifted slightly into the shoulder and swerved to avoid sideswiping the van. Being a young, inexperienced driver, I overcorrected. Full panic set in as my Honda Civic slid into the left guardrail, sailed across all 3 lanes of traffic, flipped around facing the wrong direction, and finally skidded to a halt. It shook me up good, but I didn't hit a single soul. Cop: "How fast were you going?" Me: "About 70 to 75. "The speed limit here is 55. Are you sure you were going that fast?" "Maybe I was going faster. It could have been 80 or 85. Him, face palming: "The speed limit here is 55. If you are going faster, I have to ticket you for reckless driving. I don't want to ticket you. Tell me, what's the speed limit here?" 55? "How fast were you going?" 55? "That's right. You were going 55. Then to the next question. I didn't see any damage to the guardrail that you hit. Did you?" "I don't know. There could be some damage. I didn't see it." "If there's damage to the guardrail, you'll have to pay a few $1,000s to fix it. Now, did you see any damage to the guardrail?" "I didn't." "No, I didn't see any damage either." "Good." In conclusion, cop had me change my story so as not to incriminate myself. This sounds like something I can relate to, too stupid to accept the obvious easy out I was being offered. Here's a follow-up comment below. Reminds me, in college I lived on the second floor of a small apartment complex. Everyone in the buildings was students, and 90% of the buildings in the area housed students. The people downstairs were having a decent-sized party that had spilled outside onto the deck and front yard, which isn't really a big deal as it was a weekend night with nothing but students around. A high school student who was at the party had wandered off about a block away and was peeing on a fence. A cop was driving by and turned his lights on. Kid, of course, runs right back to the party, which causes the cops to come and break it up. As the cops arrive, I head back upstairs and watch everything unfold from my balcony. The cops are talking to the guys who live below. Cop: "This kid we saw down the street says you're responsible for him. If you are, we have to arrest, ticket, whatever the punishment for providing alcohol to a minor. Are you responsible for him?" Neighbor: "Yes, he's my friend." "Are you sure you're responsible?" "Yes." "Are you really sure?" "Yes." "If you don't know him, we will just call his parents to pick him up. So are you responsible for him?" "Oh, wait, no, I've never seen him before." Police officer here. There are plenty I don't enforce, but as stated above, I have enforcement discretion in 99% of situations. My hands are rarely forced to pursue charges where the victim is the state or city. Traffic violations, substance charges, etc. I personally try not to enforce anything that I'd do. I speed sometimes I'll roll a stop sign, and other minor things. I hate working traffic and generally stay too busy bouncing from call to actually do it, so that also has a bearing on what I enforce. Now that being said, I will hammer you if you're causing direct danger to another person. If you're excessively speeding during rush hour, through a school zone, or with kids in your car, then I will issue paperwork all day. But it generally has to be a situation that causes immediate danger to someone other than yourself. If it's 3 a.m. and you're doing 70 in a 50 on a back road, chances are I'm just going to let you be. Also, petty stuff. There's a lot of technicalities written in laws. Sometimes slight variations make something legal become illegal. I try to avoid crap like that. I try to keep a good repertoire with the people in the areas I work in. So taking enforcement action on some bullcrap law is a quick way to make enemies. I've learned over the years that the people I'm nice to today may be the ones who come to my rescue tomorrow. It's happened before. Warnings are my best friend. People appreciate warnings. Usually "Hey man, you know your headlight's out? Try to get it fixed, okay?" is enough so that next time you see them, it'll be working. And finally, Reddit's favorite subject, green herb. I work with a lot of younger guys. We're all pretty progressive and understand that Mary J. prohibition is a joke. Most of us try our best not to take action on a personal use unless we absolutely have to. Sadly, the older guys around here don't share our views on the subject, and what's even worse is that there are sergeants, lieutenants, and captains. Sometimes our hands are forced, but I work with a very good department that does allow us tons of enforcement discretion. Not a cop, but my dad is. This isn't exactly a refusal to enforce a particular law, but he works in an area of higher crime rates and he's always trying to instill a sense of trust in the youth. One day, he was walking back to his patrol car after a call and he saw some younger guys playing basketball. He walks over to them and sternly asks for the ball. They ask him why, but with no explanation, he again tells them to hand the ball over. They disappointedly toss the ball over, thinking it's just another butthole cop trying to ruin their day. Instead, my dad drains a 3 and just walks away. He believes that interactions like this with cops will give the youth a better sense of trust in law enforcement systems. Just thought I'd share. He would have looked like such a tool if he missed. Cop here. I generally don't arrest for small amounts of Mary J. A, I don't think that green herb is bad, and B, it's nearly legalized medicine at this point anyway. I'm not big on ticket writing. Tickets are expensive and almost everyone is broke right now. I find that usually a 2-minute conversation with an officer makes people change their driving habits anyway. Plus they feel super lucky for having caught a break. You need to remember that officers have a lot of discretion. However, if there's a victim and probable cause, that discretion can go away. For instance, shoplifting a $2 item. If the store caught you and insists on prosecution, there's not much that I can do. The thing is, I still have discretion over what to do with a person, i.e. release them from the scene with a ticket, bring them to the station to fingerprint or photograph or issue a ticket and release, or book them into jail overnight. Any contact can turn into a dangerous situation. Go to odmp.org and look at the line of duty deaths just for 2012. 2 of them occurred during regular prisoner transports. Generally, the more dangerous a call seems, the more amped up, aware, and prepared you are. I'm more worried about getting shot as I open the bathroom door after taking a leak at a gas station. I've never thought about the downtime of a police's life being so dangerous, and the fact that a lot of fatalities can occur at the least expected time in it. It does make sense, I suppose. I do not enforce Mary J. so long as 1. It's a misdemeanor account, 2. You're not selling, 3. You're not a prick. That being said, I will make you dispose of it. I'm allergic to it or something.
Within seconds of coming close to it, I will get a migraine. Homosexual behavior is still on the books in Texas under deviant behavior. I don't enforce this. The selling of armadillos is against the law in Texas as well. I won't arrest you, but I'm documenting it. It's like a bucket list of offenses I want to come across as a cop. I am not likely to write any traffic citation so long as it's not a hazardous violation and so long as you agree to fix the issue. I usually try and find all drunks an alternative to jail unless they're driving or fighting. I never let something slide because it might be dangerous. I signed up knowing full well I can die doing this job, and have used myself as a shield to protect people on more than one occasion. I hope this helps. Back when I was a cop, 12 years ago, I never arrested anyone for possession of Mary J. It was pointless, and there are already too many people in jail for what I deem minor possession charges. I remember I stopped a guy. Well, I didn't stop him, he was stopped at a stop sign for 13 minutes before I pulled up behind him. I questioned him, realized that he was baked out of his mind because he told me he was waiting for the stop sign to turn green. Pulled him out of the car, got permission to search, found a bag with about a half an ounce in it, and I went over to him and asked if he had someone who could come and get him. He called his girlfriend, and as we waited, I threw his bag in the ditch. When his girlfriend got there, I said this to him: "I'm gonna sit right over here in that parking lot and do my reports. If I see you back here before I leave, I'll arrest you. I don't care if you come back and get the stuff from the ditch, but it better be after I leave." He didn't come back, but the bag was gone by the time my shift ended. I've always been a proponent of legalizing Mary J. Why? Because if we're at a bar and I'm drunk and I bump into another drunk guy, chances are we're going to fight. If I'm high and I bump into another high guy, chances are we laugh. It can't be legalized for a myriad of reasons that I won't get into here. The premise of the question is inherently flawed because of a common misconception about how policing works. The law is less a set of rules cops have to enforce and more a tool cops have for handling situations. It's pretty rare that cops have to enforce the law. Felonies and certain domestic or abuse crimes are the only ones that have to be charged, and even there, it's not hard to find wiggle room on how you define the crime. For example, public drunkenness is a crime. Do I stand in front of bars and make everyone do sobriety tests? No. Now, if you're yelling and screaming like a jackass and making a scene, I'll come up and tell you it's time to get gone. If that doesn't work, I'll arrest you for public drunkenness and make you bookings problem. So do I choose not to enforce particular laws? Yeah, all the time. It's basically my entire job. And this trickles down into your other questions. Enforcing the law is always weighed against what risks are associated with the arrest, how likely the victims are to testify, and a dozen other factors. Law enforcement is more art than science. Bonus secret, most cops, particularly in cities, don't want to arrest people for the day-to-day silliness. It's a lot of paperwork, you're now responsible for the person while you get them cited or booked, and then you have to go to court on your days off. It's really just a huge pain in the butt. The trick to slipping out of most arrests is about making letting you go less of a hassle than arresting you. Question: when you say making letting you go less of a hassle than arresting you, can you elaborate a little? Less hassle is as follows. Number 1. Get gone. If a cop says move along, your best bet is to be somewhere else. 98% of the time, this is all the bar owners or neighbors want. The last guy standing there arguing about how the Constitution gives him the right to sing "Free Bird" at 3 a.m. on a public street corner usually loses that argument and a chunk of his next paycheck. Number 2. Be a good sobriety wingman. When I'm dealing with the numerous situations that come from drunk people, I usually look for their sober friend because he's the best bet to defuse the situation. Don't be afraid to step in for your friend and say something like, "Officer, I know he's gotten out of hand, my car is over here, let me take him home, and he won't be any more trouble." Rare is the cop who will pass up an opportunity to make a drunk person someone else's problem. 3. Fight it out in the morning. There's this kind of bizarre belief that cops are going to be your referee for bar fights, domestics, and all kinds of assorted nonsense. We're never going to figure out who was right. We've only been called because the fighting or screaming. If it's a bar thing, just let it go and move on. If it's a domestic, don't try and convince the cop you were right. Convince the cop you're reasonable enough to not fight anymore. Offer to take a walk or stay with a friend. Come back to argue in the morning when you've got a cooler head. In conclusion, cops are there to de-escalate the situation or lock people up. If you're willing to be the one to de-escalate, you're more likely to avoid being locked up. There we go. We not only have a list of crimes that cops are likely to let people walk for, we also have suggestions of ways to increase your likelihood of that outcome. I policed a small town for a decade and have been at a city station for longer. Generally, if I come across a situation where I could use my discretion, I would.
For example, I would usually convey a drunk home rather than have them sober up in the cells. For recidivist offenders where a brush with the law was not sufficient, or where a person's behavior warranted more direct action, I would enforce the law to the letter. I'm all about giving people a chance, but only up to a point, even if I don't agree with the penalty that might be enacted at court, or if I don't agree with the law itself. I have never not arrested just because of a dangerous situation. I couldn't live with myself if a failure to act on my part led to a bad day for a member of the public. That, and I don't want to leave a job undone, just so some of my workmates have to come in later to do it. Hopefully that answers your question. I remember during high school prom, 9 to 10 years ago, I had my parents' car. It was a pretty fast car at that time, a 300 horsepower V8. I was driving like a complete idiot, going over double the speed limit. A cop sees me and follows me just as I pull into my friend's driveway. I walk over to him knowing that I've messed up big time. He was pretty intimidating and borderline yelling at me. He eventually let me off saying he didn't want to ruin my prom night. I was basically yes sirring the entire time while crapping my pants. Wherever this cop is, I have never been pulled over for speeding since. You did a damn good job and I now race my current car in a controlled track environment. I still love to drive fast, but it never happens on public roads. Arbitrary laws stopping drinking are counterproductive. Sensible drinking should be something that you're brought into. In continental Europe, it's perfectly normal to drink a small amount of wine with a meal. You just mix in water to lower the alcohol content, and drinking sensibly becomes the norm. When you make drinking illegal, all that happens is people start drinking with no prior experience and end up drinking to excess, which in turn promotes violence and makes many areas dangerous at night. I would make a distinction between laws that I chose not to enforce and crimes. I never wrote a speeding ticket for less than 15 over, unless there's an extenuating circumstance, school zone, extremely careless, butthole, etc. I also never got really excited about small amounts of Mary J, a violation as opposed to a crime in the state I worked in. Criminal offenses are a little different. I can't recall ever not enforcing a solid criminal offense, unless it was something small. Criminal trespass where it was easier to just run the person off, or if the person was rolling on someone else, or the victim wasn't interested in prosecution. That doesn't mean I wouldn't write a citation to appear and forward the case to the DA on a weak case or for other circumstances. Also, I once arrested a county commissioner's son for DUI and had a former friend arrested for it as well. I do not believe in breaks for nepotism. There are some circumstances that I'm aware of that police openly ignore some criminal activity because enforcement becomes impossible. Enforcing Mary J laws at Grateful Dead concerts would be pointless. What's the worst thing your parents have found on your phone or computer? Just so our listeners are aware, you're going to be getting more of an ASMR effect as I speak quieter and closer to the microphone. I've been a little bit sick and I want to avoid tearing my throat. I spent about 5 days in a mental institution about 15 months ago. I gave my mum the passcode to my phone for whatever reason, to either Snapchat people or read my text that I'd received, or something small, in and out like that. Like she had to click one thing, tell me what it said, respond, and close it. I was 16, by the way. Anyway, when I got home, she told me she found pictures of a negative pregnancy test on my phone from a month or so earlier, and she took me to a doctor. Turns out I had scar tissue in my uterus from a miscarriage 6-ish months earlier. Scared the crap out of me. Very grateful that she did it because the tissue could have inhibited me from having children in the future if it had gotten necrotic or something. I lived with my aunt briefly when I was about 12 years old. One night my uncle hooked me up with a bunch of video games and installed them on my computer. My brother said he saw my uncle find my adult flick stash on my computer, but I assumed he was messing with me. Well, next morning, apparently, my very uptight aunt barged into my room while I was on the computer and told me, "There are some things on your computer you need to delete." I immediately realized my brother was telling the truth, so under my aunt's burning gaze, I went to the adult flick folder to delete it. Only I have so much adrenaline going through me that instead of just deleting the folder itself, I decide to click it open. So now there's a bunch of extra large thumbnails showing on my monitor of hardcore adult flicks, while my aunt is standing right behind me. This gives me another shot of adrenaline and my 12-year-old head is swimming. I try to select all of the files, but my hands are so damn wigged out now that instead of being able to select all the thumbnails to delete them, I keep just double-clicking on an image of a girl getting railed by some gorilla of a man. This happens around 3 more times as I'm physically unable to make my hand work the mouse properly, and all I can think about is my aunt thinking, why in the world does this kid keep clicking on this crap? Eventually, I finally delete everything. Writing this has made me realize that I need to ask my uncle why he decided to be a rat next time I see him. When I was 11, they found out I search, "Does white snow affect cows?"
Well, does it? If I recall correctly, most mammals are affected by white snow.
With a body weight like that, it's going to be expensive. I don't see what the problem is personally. I Google that kind of thing all the time out of morbid curiosity. Before I had my own computer, I'd use my dad's desktop to browse the internet, listen to music, etc. I would message a friend of mine on Facebook quite a bit. We'd talk about a lot of stuff, but of course, mainly girls from school. Dad saw a few messages that were extremely explicit about a few girls from class, about wanting to be smothered by their various bodily parts and crap stuff like that. One of the most embarrassing moments of my life. Extremely passionate diary entries about Daniel Radcliffe from the Philosopher's Stone era. I was around 11, and the diary entries were in epistolary format. Cringe. Back in 1999 or so, my mum was embarrassed that I had a song called Horny Horns on the computer when we had to get it fixed. I told her it barely had any lyrics and it wasn't naughty at all, but she was worried the computer guy would think it was. When we got the computer back, the guy said I had some interesting taste in music in there, late 90s techno, and she said, "See? The only reason he listened to it is because it had horny in the name." I'm so embarrassed. I can imagine this guy with his pants down, lube, and tissues at the ready, only to click on it and it plays 90s techno. On the other hand, it does take real dedication to your craft to be able to pleasure yourself to a MIDI file. Mum saw my history of adult fun time scenes in TV shows and unspeakable act scenes. It was in 4th grade. I was curious and absolutely mortified.
Yeah, I found that stuff when I was 9. Thought it was way too adult for me.
So I searched prawn for kids and kid prawn. My parents are probably on some kind of list. This is somehow messed up and wholesome at the same time.
Ah yes, the curious kid searches. My son did this as well when he was about that age, except it was a little more gay. He didn't understand what that word meant, so he naturally went to YouTube to see what he could find. So he's seen some stuff at a young age. I accidentally sent my mum a fanfiction about SpongeBob getting the unspeakable act committed against him by a gang. When I was younger, my mum found a lesbian adult flicks on my computer. I blamed it on my grandma. I guess this isn't bad, but it did change my life. My sister went on a shared laptop, and I had stupidly left open my internet browser, which had pro-anorexia websites and blogs still open. I was 14 or 15. She told my mum, who thought it was a cry for attention, but it really wasn't. I was furious that they'd found this, and was promptly sent into a network of doctors for my eating disorder. Kinda pre-rehab for those who aren't physically needing hospitalization, but mentally are messed up. It was a rough 4 years, but who knows where I'd be if I hadn't gotten the help I needed back then. I'm doing much better now. ED conquered. Nothing, 'cause I'm the best at hiding stuffs.
Hid my brother 7 years ago, and no one has found him yet. My mum found a Tumblr post when I was 18 where I'd said,
"Wow, today I got 4 piercings and did it in the butt for the first time. #eventful.
Like others have said, my browser history. However, my mother printed them out, like Excel format, 4 or 5 pages long like some sort of really screwed up Walmart receipt. She then sat me down and read them aloud back to me in front of my 2 brothers. I tried the old political fallback of deny, deny, deny when she dropped the bombshell. My email login was at the top and bottom of every list. This is really bad, but when I was 13, I was super afraid the zombie apocalypse was going to really happen. So I found and downloaded the Army's Improvised Weapons and Munitions Handbook. Yeah, imagine a 13-year-old with a file labeled explosives on his laptop. Man, I now understand why kids thought I was going to shoot up the school when I mentioned mixing 2 ingredients would make it go boom in chemistry. Plus, I probably ended up on a list somewhere. Now that I'm thinking about it, I might have a flash drive with the book somewhere in my room. To all the people asking for a link, yeah, I'm not going to go down for distributing bomb-making material, so no thanks. And we're all poorer for it, sir. Share your crazy prepper life with us so we can devour it wholesale. Wet, word for female anatomy, games.com. And then I learned about deleting history. Literally the same thing happened to me. All I think about is how happy I am I learned that lesson before I realized I was gay. Parents didn't find, I found on the family computer.
My brother would stay up late and look up a bunch of adult flicks, and he wouldn't clear the browser history. I, being a very nice brother, would clear it every morning. Eventually, I got so sick of having to do that I changed the desktop wallpaper to say, "Please remember to clear your browser history." That's pretty great. How did he respond to that? He probably thought it was from his parents. Imagine that feeling. I did this to my dad once. Looked up the song Redbone on his phone, and it auto-filled to RedTube. Changed his home screen to an image saying, "Clear your history." I did a kind of similar thing to my dad once when I was 15. I was looking for a movie to watch on his computer. He torrents movies instead of buying them because he travels for work a lot, and it's easier to have movies and TV shows on files rather than dragging DVDs and stuff around. But anyway, back to the story. And instead of having a nice Harry Potter movie to watch, I found his adult flick stash. I still to this day have no idea how I came across it, considering I've downloaded movies from his laptop numerous times. I renamed all the files to names like, "I know what you're doing," and "Ew," and "Father, I love you, but can you put these somewhere I can't find them, please?" I wonder if he found them. It has never once been discussed. My mum randomly asked for my phone, so I was like, "Sure." She went through my phone and I had forgotten that I'd downloaded a video from Pornhub about a few days before. She found it and it was a woman riding a guy on a couch. I was in 7th grade. Makes me cringe and laugh. Reminds me of my experience. She walked into the room I was in while I was on my laptop and read what I was reading over my shoulder. All adult fanfiction. I was like 12. She took my computer away and made me go pray. I'm female. I was around 12 years old when my dad found bondage searches on the computer. My searches for big-chested women as well. It was a very, very awkward talk. He taught me how to delete my browsing history too. I'm 23 now, so 11-ish years ago. We're best buddies and text basically every day. Even though his princess might have turned out to be into lesbian bondage stuff, I'm still his favorite kid, out of 5 kids. You're also my favorite out of his 5 kids. I was looking for a way to get high from household items. My mum was not happy or proud. She called me about it when I was 30 minutes into a weekend-long road trip. Sorry, Mum. When I was about 13, my mum found some satanic memes on my phone. They were jokes and pretty much parodies of just girly things on Tumblr. You know, like getting your nails matching with your best friend, just girly things. Like those, except she found one that went, sacrificing your best friends to Satan and pledging your allegiance to the Dark Lord, just girly things, with an image of someone holding a hammer and a nail on top of Justin Bieber's head, when he was just a coconut head, and ready to pound it. Some real edgy humor. Boy, did this land me in hot water. My mum found it, swore I was legitimately satanic, and started shaking and putting her hands over me talking about, "The power of Christ compels you, you leave, demon," and crap like that. Was I really satanic? No, just freaking edgy and dumb in the 8th grade. She tells the family she thinks I'm satanic. She tells the pastor at my local church that she thinks I'm being persuaded by Satan to do evil crap. That I'm giving into temptation. So cue me in this pastor's office as it's a private church/school and he has an office. And he talks to me about why Satan is evil and why I may feel like following him and not God. What's wrong? What's my home situation like? Just took a very awkward conversation when he realizes I'm some naive kid who probably didn't really follow Satan. Took a while for her to believe I wasn't trying to be satanic. She probably still thinks that I was serious, and if it wasn't, then it was too edgy and dark for me to be joking about at that age. But yeah, that's the worst thing. Never been caught lacking with adult flicks. Satanic memes, on the other hand, yes. It does baffle me how much of children's moral guidance seems to be placed in the hands of religious leaders in some places, instead of, educators and trained caregivers. Also, the next video contains numerous references to a particular form of Japanese media consisting of tentacles and adult content. I've invented my own word for it so that this video doesn't get taken down and demonetized. Thanks. Okay, Mom, firstly, you need to understand that this isn't prawn, right? It's called octopron. Yes, that's a Japanese phrase. I'm learning Japanese from these videos. Before I get to the part about learning Japanese, though, let me comment first on the cultural implications of octopron. After the Second World War, which Japan lost after the nuclear bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the entire country underwent a period of self-reflection and soul-searching. They wanted to understand how events led to the rest of the world responding with such devastating atomic attacks. This led to a strong antipathy towards warmongering and international aggression. You may have heard about how the Japanese constitution doesn't allow the country to have an active military. Same idea. A lot of post-war Japanese culture is a reflection of such attitudes. For example, the Godzilla movies are not just about giant monsters fighting each other. They're about the horrors of unbridled atomic technology. Godzilla is always depicted as being powered by or healed by nuclear power, and how such a horrifying force can never be allowed to be unleashed on humanity again. On a similar note, Japanese animation enjoyed a resurgence of popularity after the war, due to the populace choosing to turn towards the comforting images of their youth. Japanese kids, much like the kids in our country, like to watch cartoons. As a result, psychologically speaking, cartoons represent a reminder of the simpler and more innocent age. This upsurge in popularity resulted in animated images pervading almost all of Japanese culture, from movies to television to advertising to music videos and so on and so forth. And because animated images were so widely accepted throughout Japan, they were used for almost every type of source material, or to tell any type of story. Animation was no longer the sole domain of children. You got animated movies that told very mature stories, like Ghost in the Machine or Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Sometimes you get stories that involve very mature topics, like war or murder or the unspeakable act or torture. The Japanese have generally become quite accustomed to seeing depictions of such things in their animations. So yeah, that's why I was watching this movie. It's an epic tale about a space crew exploring a distant planet. The crew's all female because Japan's very into gender equality, and they run into a hostile alien with a bunch of tentacles, and well, I don't want to spoil the story for you, but let's just say the crew eventually figure out how to get along with the alien. It's a story about bridging cultural gaps and finding common ground. Seriously, it's worth watching. Okay, next, you remember how I talked about knowing Japanese words and phrases now? It's because these movies are subtitled in English, so I could learn Japanese while watching them. I mean, I know words like yamete and ai and igu and lots of others. Much better than just knowing konnichiwa, isn't it? I mean, I'm developing such an interest in octopron that I might just be a major in Japanese when I go to college. Who knows, I might be the one writing the subtitles in the future. Oh, and one last thing, you should know that octopron's considered pretty mainstream in Japan now. And it's also quite common in the Western world now, too. Everyone's watching it. I mean, if I don't watch it, I'll be seen as some sort of freak at school. You don't want your son to be some kind of pariah because he doesn't watch Octopron now, do you? I was actually 20 when this happened, but it's still a good story. Eating dinner at a restaurant with mum, aunt, uncle, grandmother, roommate, and a couple of family friends. I take out my phone to show my roommate, who sat beside me, a couple of funny selfies I took wearing his glasses. I'm swiping right to show him more photos, and then there's an eggplant pic. A big, veiny, red-old eggplant pic. We both jump violently in surprise. I make a sort of squealing sound and we both blush. My mum is sat opposite us and gives us a funny look. She looks like she's about to ask, then decides against it. We eat dinner. When I was like 16 or 17, my parents found an exposed picture on my phone that I sent to my boyfriend at the time. They each separately came into my room to lecture me, /cry about me being a heathen, and then held up the picture of my bare butt the entire time. And then they came in together to pray over me because they thought Satan was trying to take over my body. Undressed photos of my then girlfriend. She thought I had them to blackmail her if I needed to and made a big story out of it, including talking to her father. They found out through my browser history that I was an active participant of a pro-anorexia forum, and they read all of my pathetic posts on there. I also had an accountability thread where I kept track of how much I starved myself, so they were really thrilled to find out about that. That wasn't a good time at all for me. Oofed. We all hope you're doing better now, story writer of that post. That disorder is no joke. Obligatory, not me but my sister, blah blah. Anyway, my sister is showing my grandparents something on her phone. She walks away for a moment to talk to me, then goes to take her phone back. The first thing that she notices is that the Google Assistant was scrolling through her gallery and was showing off the personal pictures she sent to her boyfriend. She's hoping it didn't show, but my grandparents are looking at her very strangely. Thankfully, she had underwear on in the pictures and they didn't include her face. We were able to write it off as being from our weird cousin, but it was still too close for comfort.
Google Assistant was barred from gallery after that. What have mine found? Octopron I saved years ago as a curious preteen. What haven't they found? About 40,000 words worth of adult fiction that I've written. So this was funny. I must have been about 15 at the time. My half-sister, 3 years younger, was caught by her dad looking up adult flicks. To be fair to her, my mum decided to search both hers and my search history. Oh no, JPEG. I played it cool while my mum scrolled through months of my search history. I sat in my room watching YouTube or browsing the internet every day. Lots of adult flicks. Worst thing she finds is a Shane Dawson video titled, "She Licked My Ball, XD," or something like that. Oh my god, what is this? It's just a silly YouTube video, click on it, it's okay, I swear. She gets bored after a few minutes. Continues scrolling for a few more months worth of search history. Okay, son, glad to know I can trust you. And gives me a hug. I pleasured myself that night to some hardcore crap, praying my thanks to the incognito gods. I regret nothing. One time back in the day, my brother printed out an exposed girl photo from our family computer and printer. It was not HD to say the least. He apparently hid it in the household computer desk. Mum confronts us a while later about a picture from a web address called Dumpster Hussies. We never got in trouble of any sort, but think she was more worried about viruses. Also, I'm pretty sure one time my mum went to the printer and there was a backlog of orders yet to print, and they were also adult flicks of some sort. When I was much younger, middle school, my mother happened to grab my phone to look for something, and just my damn luck, I'd forgotten to close out of the hub. Especially unfortunate was the fact that when I was 18 and abused ads played as a banner, and my unsuspecting mother tapped that ad, that's what she thought I was watching. So now she thinks I'm into that very unpleasant side of adult flicks, and I had quite the talking to. Thank God she didn't scroll down and see what I was actually watching. Embarrassing to admit, but gay stepbrother fanfiction. Between Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly? Phineas and Ferb? I went through a period where I obsessively looked at adult flicks, about 12 years old. I actually wouldn't pleasure myself or anything, I just watched it because the concept of adult fun times was so new to me. The problem was, I would do it on my mum's computer because I didn't have it on my own. I would do it when she was out of the house walking our dog, but I never knew she was coming back until I heard the click of the front door lock opening. So I had about 4 seconds to close the browser and run to a different room and act like nothing was going on. Well, one day I was a few seconds too late and my mum poked her head into the office just as I was closing the tab. She immediately checked the history and found everything. Her solution was to remove the door from the office room so I couldn't have privacy in there. This was roughly 5 years ago when the entire family shared a computer, and a very crappy one at that. Overheated in an hour of cancerous Facebook game playing, and browser tabs constantly froze. One time I didn't get lucky enough for the tab to close in time for my dad to gain sight of the screen. The whole tab went blank, as that's what it tended to do when it froze, yet the title of the tab only read one word, which my father had to read, knowing full well it was an intentional search. Horse anatomy. My dad saw my interest in computers at an early age, so he bought me one. There wasn't any real pop-up blocker standard back then, so I stumbled upon videos of girls mud wrestling somehow. One thing led to another, and my dad ended up finding my search history. The next day, my dad took away the computer and gave me the talk. Imagine your small, frail librarian, my mother, sitting across from you reading out loud the names of those websites, www and .com included. She just put out her finger every time I tried to talk, fixed her glasses, and continued. My dad once found a not-safe-for-work conversation I was having with a male interest at the time. He read the entire thing back to me, aloud, told me I could be found guilty of being a hussy in a court of law, and showed his friends the entire conversation, including pictures, because it was appalling and disgusting and he needed advice. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description too. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.